Before we dive into the next exciting story, drop a comment below and let me know, what time is it where you're watching from? I'm curious to see where everyone's tuning in from around the world. People say the Appalachian forests are haunted. I'd heard the rumors, whispers of restless spirits and strange disappearances, but I'd never given them much thought. After years of debunking ghost stories as a journalist, I became the kind of person who trusted facts, not folklore. Still, I couldn't resist the pull of Pisgah National Forest. It was remote, beautiful, and full of forgotten places that no one cared to visit anymore. Perfect for the series I'd been working on for my blog, Ghost Towns of the Forgotten South. This was my passion now. Traveling, exploring the lost corners of America, and turning those empty spaces into stories. This time, I was after an old settlement deep in the forest, one that most people in town wouldn't even talk about. There were no records of why it had been abandoned, just strange rumors of sickness and disappearances. But those stories were always embellished over time. People loved their spooky tales, and it was my job to sift the truth from the legend. I parked my RV at a secluded spot near the trailhead, not far from the ghost town, or what remained of it. I planned to spend a couple of nights out here, explore, take some pictures, and maybe talk to a few locals who might know more about its history. The air was crisp and cool as I stepped outside. The towering trees cast long shadows, making it feel later than it was. As I set up camp, I noticed how unnaturally quiet the forest was. No birds, no rustling leaves, just silence. I brushed it off. Deep forests always had a strange stillness about them. I'd been in enough of them to know that the real danger was tripping over a root, not some ghostly figure hiding behind the trees. That first night, I woke to a distant sound, like laughter. It was faint, barely a whisper on the wind. I sat up in my sleeping bag, listening. Could there be other campers out here? I doubted it. This part of the forest wasn't exactly a tourist hotspot. My phone was dead, but I'd recorded some video earlier in the day. I grabbed my camera and replayed the footage. There it was, faint, like a breeze blowing through, but unmistakable. Children's laughter. I pushed it out of my mind and went back to sleep. I had a lot of ground to cover tomorrow, and the last thing I needed was to let my imagination run wild. The next day, I set out to find the old settlement. It was slow going. Thick overgrowth and fading trails made navigation difficult. The map I had was basic, nothing more than a dotted line leading me deeper into the woods. The farther I went, the heavier the air felt, like the forest was closing in around me. But I kept going, determined to find this place. After about an hour, I noticed carvings, symbols, strange and jagged, etched into the bark of the trees. They weren't any kind of writing I recognized, but they gave me an uneasy feeling. Maybe it was some old superstition, a way to ward off bad spirits. I took a few photos and kept moving. It was another hour before I finally found it. The ghost town was just as eerie as I'd imagined. Small, dilapidated cabins stood in clusters, some half collapsed under the weight of time and nature. Weeds and vines crept over everything, reclaiming the land. I walked through the empty streets, my camera clicking as I captured the desolation, the eerie stillness. That's when I saw the cemetery. Small, tucked away behind what must have been the church, though the building itself was nothing more than a few rotting beams. The graves were old, the names barely legible, but the dates caught my eye. Some of them were from decades ago, but others were from the future. My first instinct was that it had to be a mistake, some kind of misprint or vandalism, but the stones looked too old, too weathered to be recent. A chill ran down my spine as I stepped back from the graves. It didn't make sense, and I didn't like the feeling gnawing at the back of my mind. The forest was quiet again, too quiet. I realized then that I hadn't heard anything. Not birds, not insects, nothing since I'd arrived. I packed up my camera and headed back toward my RV. I'd gotten what I came for and figured I'd do some research on the strange gravestones when I got back to town. But something was wrong. The trail didn't look right. I was sure I'd come from this direction, but now the trees seemed different. The symbols I'd passed earlier weren't there anymore, and the forest seemed denser, more oppressive. My pulse quickened. I was lost. That was impossible. I never got lost. Not with GPS and maps, not with all the preparation I'd done. I kept walking, trying to retrace my steps, but the more I walked, the more disoriented I became. Every turn led me to unfamiliar territory, and soon the forest looked completely foreign. My sense of time slipped away, and the sky started to darken, even though it felt like midday. Then I saw it, just ahead, through the trees. A figure stood on the trail, tall and motionless, watching me. I stopped cold, my heart hammering in my chest. "Hello?" I called, my voice sounding smaller than I'd intended. No response. The figure didn't move. I took a step closer, squinting through the gloom, but as I did, it vanished, just gone. I spun around, scanning the trees, but there was no sign of anyone. My hands shook as I adjusted my pack. This was wrong. Everything was wrong. The sun had nearly set by the time I found my RV. It was parked where I left it, but somehow, the journey back had taken hours longer than it should have. My legs were aching, my mind spinning with confusion. I climbed inside, locking the door behind me and collapsing onto the bed. That's when the laughter started again, louder this time, right outside the RV. I shot up, my heart pounding. I could hear them, children laughing and running around, their voices bouncing off the trees. I grabbed the camera, pointing it toward the window. But the moment I did, the laughter stopped. The forest was silent again, suffocating in its stillness. I played back the footage on the camera, hoping to catch something, anything, that would explain what was happening. But instead, I heard something else. A voice, clear as day, whispering my name. "Alex." I froze. The camera dropped from my hands and hit the floor with a thud, the sound echoing in the empty RV. Something was out there, and it knew my name. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in the bed, every muscle tense, listening to the silence, waiting for something to happen. I thought about leaving, driving out of the forest and abandoning the project altogether. But the RV wouldn't start. I tried the engine a dozen times, but it was dead. Dead as if the battery had drained overnight. My phone was useless, still dead from the day before. I was completely cut off. The next morning I decided I had to do something. I couldn't stay here, not with whatever was out there watching me. I remembered the symbols on the trees, the strange carvings I'd seen on my hike. They had to mean something. Maybe they were the key to getting out of here. I grabbed my camping knife and headed back into the woods. The air was heavy, thick with a sense of dread. My stomach churned, but I forced myself to keep walking. I found the first symbol carved into the bark of a tree just off the trail. With a deep breath, I drove the blade into the wood, carving through the lines. As soon as the symbol was broken, the air shifted. The forest seemed to shudder, and for a moment, I thought I heard a scream, a distant echo and wail carried on the wind. I stumbled back, my heart racing, but I kept going. I found the next tree and did the same, cutting through the strange lines with my knife. The voices grew louder, the laughter, the whispers, all swirling around me like a storm. I could see the figures now darting between the trees, shadowy, faceless figures watching, waiting. They wanted me to stop, they didn't want me to leave. But I wasn't going to be trapped here. Not like them. I reached the final tree, my hands trembling as I raised the knife. The voices were deafening now, the figures closing in, but I didn't stop. With one last slash, I broke the symbol, and just like that, the voices stopped. The forest went still. The shadows vanished, and the oppressive weight that it had hung over me lifted. I stumbled back toward my RV, half expecting the figures to reappear, but the woods were empty. When I got back, the engine started on the first try. I didn't look back as I drove out of the forest, my hands gripping the steering wheel tight enough to turn my knuckles wide. I wasn't going to write about this place. I wasn't going to tell anyone what happened here. Some things are better left forgotten. Before we dive into the next exciting story, drop a comment below and let me know, what time is it where you're watching from? I'm curious to see where everyone's tuning in from around the world. My name is Brandon Bell, and it was in 2006, out in Alaska's Chugach National Forest, that I encountered something I'm still struggling to comprehend. I'd come out that way to reconnect with my roots. My grandparents had been of the Tlingit people, and while I didn't grow up in their traditional ways, I had always felt an instinctual pull toward the land. I'd been running a construction crew in Anchorage, working long hours in town, and figured it was time to spend a few days alone, away from machines and concrete. Call it a need for solitude, or maybe a break from people asking if I knew every other native guy they'd ever met. I had driven down to Seward, then gone on foot into the forest, carrying only essentials: a basic tent, my pocket knife, a thermos, and of course, a flask of whiskey. No shame in needing a bit of warmth against those Alaskan nights. If you've never been to Chugach, you're missing out. The forest is thick and dense, and the shadows cast by those spruce trees seem to stretch forever. It's quiet, the kind of quiet that lets you hear yourself think, maybe more than you want to. The first day out there was uneventful. I set up my tent by a small clearing not far from a shallow creek. I figured I'd fish a little, hike, and drink just enough to keep warm without falling into one of those emotional monologues about my past, which had been a habit lately. I slept soundly, lulled by the sounds of running water and the wind whispering through the trees. But that night, I noticed something peculiar. No animal sounds. Not even the chatter of squirrels or the hoot of an owl, just the wind. When dawn came, I thought I'd walk farther into the woods, explore a bit more. By mid-morning, I found myself on an old, narrow trail. It was rough, with jagged rocks and low-hanging branches that slapped me as I walked. As I went deeper, I came across something strange: bones scattered along the path. Small ones, like a rabbit's. I didn't think much of it until I spotted more of them. Larger ones, snapped clean, maybe moose. I wasn't sure, but that's when I began to feel uneasy. My granddad once told me that the forest will give you signs if you pay attention. Sometimes they're small, like a rock balanced on another in a peculiar way. Other times they're louder, bones along a path. That felt loud to me. I kept moving, though, curiosity mixed with that primal instinct to not turn my back on something that felt threatening. The quiet seemed to deepen, thickening around me until I felt as if I were wrapped in a heavy blanket. Then I saw the cabin. I don't know how I missed it at first. It was right there, barely 50 yards away, tucked into a dense pocket of trees, old with moss crawling up its walls. The cabin looked as if it had been left to rot. Maybe an old trapper shack, I thought. Could be it had been there for years, abandoned, forgotten. I stepped closer, trying to keep my steps light. My boots crunched on dried leaves, and the sound seemed almost offensively loud in the silence. The door was slightly ajar. Against my better judgment, I pushed it open and stepped inside. The smell hit me first. A mix of damp wood, mold, and something else. Something metallic. The room was small, with just a table, a rusted stove, and a tattered cot. But there were things scattered across the floor. Bits of fur, bones, small half-chewed things I couldn't quite identify. And then there were the carvings. Etched into the walls were symbols, circles, and crude drawings of figures. They were sharp, chaotic lines gouged deep into the wood, like whoever made them did so in a hurry or frenzy. Among them was a face, or what resembled one. A crude, hollow mouth stretched into a twisted grin. Something about that face made my stomach turn. I should have left then and there, but you know how it is. Once you're hooked, you're hooked. I walked to the table, and that's when I saw the notebook. It was old, water-stained, with pages curled at the edges. The handwriting was scrawled, messy, with whole sentences crossed out or rewritten. One line stuck out. It only comes at night. It knows we're afraid. It loves fear. I don't know how long I stared at those words, trying to make sense of them. Maybe it was some kind of prank, something left by a kid to mess with whoever stumbled upon it. Or maybe it was something else. I couldn't shake the feeling that the words were a warning. Suddenly, I heard a sound outside. A rustling like leaves being swept across the ground. It was faint, but enough to snap me out of my trance. I put the notebook down, backed away from the table, and crept toward the door. The rustling had stopped, but I could feel something close, maybe 20 feet away, just beyond the edge of the clearing, hidden in the trees. I looked around, heart pounding. Nothing, just shadow and more shadows. I tried to laugh it off, chalk it up to paranoia, but that's when I saw it. A shape moving through the trees. It was low, hunched like a bear on all fours, but smaller, more agile. It moved in quick, jerky motions, each step snapping twigs beneath its weight. I bolted back into the cabin, slamming the door shut behind me. My breaths were shallow, loud in the silence, and I tried to steady myself. It was just an animal, I told myself, just a bear or a wolf. Nothing I hadn't seen before. But deep down, I knew I was lying. Whatever was out there, it wasn't any animal I'd ever seen. After a few minutes of strained quiet, I figured maybe it had wandered off. I cracked open the door just a hair, peeking out into the woods. There was no sign of it. Relief washed over me, and I almost laughed at my own cowardice. But as I stepped out, something flew past my head, barely missing me, and smashed into the wall behind me. I turned, eyes wide, and saw it. A rock, jagged and sharp, thrown with precision, aimed to kill. I backed up, fists clenched, scanning the trees, and then I saw it again. That shape, slinking between the trunks, closer now. I ran. I didn't care where, just away from that clearing. My boots pounded against the earth, kicking up dirt and leaves, and every few seconds I'd glance back to see if it was following me. And it was. I could hear its steps, swift and steady, not far behind. The forest seemed to close in on me, branches reaching out, snagging at my clothes, scratching my arms and face. I tripped once, went sprawling into the dirt, but scrambled back up, forcing myself to keep moving. I was losing it. I knew that much. I could hear it snapping twigs, breathing in a way that sounded like a sick dog, wheezing for breath. It was getting closer, and my lungs were burning, my legs aching. Finally, I broke through the trees and found myself back at the creek. And there it was, across the water, watching me. It had a shape I could barely describe, something between a wolf and a lizard, hunched with long, sinewy arms that dangled almost to the ground. Its skin was dark, covered in patches of what looked like scales or fur, and its mouth stretched wide, too wide, with something slick and red dripping from its jaw. It wasn't just an animal. I knew that much. I fumbled for my flask, desperate, maybe hoping a swig would calm my nerves. My hands were shaking so badly I nearly dropped it. The creature tilted its head, almost curious, before it stepped into the creek, wading toward me. The water splashed around its legs, but it didn't make a sound. I took a swig, just enough to numb the edges of my terror, and threw the flask at it in a last-ditch effort. It didn't even flinch. Just kept coming, slow and methodical. I grabbed a rock, threw it, then another. Nothing. It was almost as if it enjoyed watching me panic, thrashing about like a caged animal. The creature reached the bank, stopped, and crouched low, like it was ready to pounce. That's when I heard a shout, a voice, distant but unmistakable. It was Rick, an old friend from Anchorage. I don't know why he was out there, but I'd never been so grateful to hear another human being in my life. Rick crashed through the trees, wielding a shotgun, his face set in determination. He spotted the creature and froze, eyes wide. But then he took aim and fired. The sound shattered the silence, echoing through the forest. The creature reared back, letting out a noise that sounded like a mix of a screech and a snarl, then bolted, disappearing into the trees. Rick helped me up, eyes scanning the woods. He muttered something about a damn nightmare and insisted we get the hell out of there. We didn't stop running until we reached his truck, parked a mile down the road. Neither of us spoke much on the drive back. There wasn't much to say. Back in Anchorage, I tried to brush it off as a close encounter with a strange animal. Maybe an injured wolf or bear with mange. But late at night, those carvings would come back to me. The face etched into the cabin wall, that twisted grin. Rick didn't say much afterward either, only that he'd seen something he couldn't unsee. We kept in touch, but he never brought up that day, like we had a mutual agreement to let it fade into memory. Then 2 years later, Rick's sister called. She said he'd gone missing on a hunting trip near the same woods. The authorities found his camp torn up and some strange markings on the trees nearby. I've always believed that everything has an explanation. Ghost stories, strange occurrences, they're all just misinterpretations of reality. That's what I told myself as I drove my RV deep into the desert, chasing the Marfa lights, one of those unexplained phenomena that people love to whisper about. I was determined to demystify them, capture them on camera, and show the world that there was nothing supernatural about it. The desert stretched out before me, flat and endless, the sky a deep, cloudless blue. I'd parked my RV on the outskirts of Marfa, Texas, far enough from the town to avoid any distractions. The lights were supposed to appear at night, floating out there in the desert like glowing orbs. People called them spirits or even UFOs, but I knew better. I was here to photograph them, document them, and move on. That first night was quiet, too quiet. I set up my camera gear just outside the RV, tripods locked in place, lenses ready for long exposure shots. The desert was unnervingly still, the kind of silence that makes you feel like you've been buried under a blanket. No wind, no animals, not even the hum of distant cars. I told myself it was just the isolation playing tricks on me. I'd been alone in the wild before. This was nothing new. Hours passed, and just as I was about to give up and call it a night, the lights appeared. At first, they were faint, barely noticeable, small glowing orbs that hovered just above the horizon. I leaned forward in my chair, eyes fixed on them. They weren't anything special, just some kind of atmospheric phenomenon, I thought. But then they moved slowly, almost deliberately. They floated closer, their soft glow reflecting off the desert sand. I snapped photo after photo, my fingers flying over the camera buttons. This was exactly what I'd come for, clear, undeniable evidence. No one could call this supernatural nonsense once I had the data. But the lights were behaving differently than I expected. They weren't just floating randomly, they were almost watching me. I stood up, staring at the lights as they hovered, flickering softly, maybe 50 yards away. Then suddenly they darted closer. My heart skipped a beat as I stepped back instinctively. The lights pulsed, brightening for a moment before retreating, as if they were playing with me. I swallowed hard, trying to steady my nerves. Just lights, just gases or atmospheric anomalies, nothing to be afraid of. But the way they moved, it was like they were alive. I shook my head, frustrated. "Focus, Greg, it's all explainable," I muttered to myself. I turned back to my camera gear, checking the shots I'd taken. That's when the first problem started. The images were completely corrupted. Every shot I'd taken of the lights was ruined, nothing but distorted lines and static like an old TV losing signal. I flipped through the photos in disbelief. The lights had been right there, clear as day, but my camera had failed to capture a single usable image. My stomach churned. That wasn't right. I'd tested all the equipment before I left. I'd checked the camera, adjusted the settings, but the battery was draining fast. Too fast. The indicator flashed red, and within seconds, the camera died in my hands. "Damn it," I hissed, grabbing my backup battery, but it was no use. Everything, camera, spare batteries, even my phone, was losing power faster than it should. It was like something was draining the life out of my equipment. Frustrated, I packed up my gear and headed back into the RV, locking the door behind me. I tried not to think about the lights still hovering outside, flickering just beyond the window. It had to be a glitch, I told myself. I'd deal with it in the morning. But I couldn't sleep. I lay in my bed, staring at the ceiling, the silence pressing in around me. Every so often, I'd glance at the window, expecting to see the lights hovering there. I didn't want to admit it, but something about them unnerved me. The following day, I tried to shake off the unease. I spent hours checking my gear, trying to figure out what had gone wrong, but everything looked fine. The equipment was fully functional again, as if nothing had happened. It was strange, but I wasn't about to let one weird night stop me. I'd try again tonight, capture the lights properly this time. As evening fell, I set up my gear again, determined to make up for last night. The desert was still, the sky a dull orange as the sun dipped below the horizon. I watched, waiting for the lights to appear, and they did. But this time they were closer. They floated just above the sand, pulsing softly, glowing brighter than before. My breath caught in my throat as I watched them move. Their rhythm was almost hypnotic. But it wasn't just their movement that startled me. It was the fact that they seemed to be getting nearer. I reached for my camera, ready to capture them again, but the battery was dead. Again. I checked my phone. Dead. Panic flickered at the edge of my mind. This wasn't possible. The lights were now just 30 feet away, their glow casting long shadows on the ground. They pulsed brighter, flickering in strange, almost deliberate patterns. I couldn't explain it, but it felt like they were trying to communicate. Then I heard it. A whisper. It was faint at first, barely audible, like the wind brushing past my ear. I froze, straining to hear. The whisper came again, but this time it was clearer. "Greg." My blood ran cold. I whipped around, searching for the source of the voice, but there was no one, just the empty desert. The whisper came again, closer this time. "Greg." I backed toward the RV, my pulse racing. This wasn't right. This wasn't explainable. The lights were hovering just a few feet away now, and the whispers, they were inside my head. I scrambled into the RV, slamming the door shut behind me, my heart hammering in my chest. The lights were outside the window, pulsing, flickering. The whispering continued, filling the small space with eerie, disembodied voices. I tried to start the engine, but it sputtered and died. No power, no escape. The lights pressed closer, their glow filling the RV, casting strange shadows on the walls. I felt them, those whispers crawling into my mind, telling me to come outside, to follow them into the desert. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles white. I wasn't going to let this beat me. I wasn't going to give in to fear. But then the lights began to move. They circled the RV faster and faster, like they were closing in on me. The whispers grew louder, more insistent. Follow the lights. I felt a tug, a pull in my chest, as if the lights were calling me, drawing me out of the RV. I fought against it, but it was getting harder to resist. The lights flickered faster, the whispers filling my head until I couldn't think, couldn't breathe. With a surge of adrenaline, I grabbed my jacket and kicked the door open, running into the desert. The lights followed, darting around me, leading me deeper into the night. I stumbled through the sand, my heart pounding. The whispers guided me further from the RV, but something inside me snapped. I stopped running, gasping for air, and turned to face the lights. I wasn't going to follow them. I wasn't going to disappear. I wasn't going to disappear like so many before me. No, I shouted, my voice trembling. I won't go. The lights pulsed, flickering faster. The whispers screamed in my head, but I stood my ground, forcing myself to ignore them. Slowly, the lights began to fade. The whispers grew softer until they were nothing more than faint echoes in the wind. I stumbled back to the RV, exhausted, my mind spinning. The lights were gone, retreating into the desert, but I knew they'd be back. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. By morning, I packed up and left Marfa. I didn't stop driving until I was miles away from the desert, back far from the lights. I never told anyone what happened. No one would believe me anyway. But I'll never forget those lights, the way they moved, the way they whispered my name. I came here to prove they were just a natural phenomenon, just an unexplained mystery of the desert. But now I know better. Some things aren't meant to be explained, and some lights should never be followed. My name is Frank Evans, and this happened to me in August of 2009. Back then, I was the epitome of the straight-laced government agent. Suit and tie, shiny shoes, and a mind full of classified protocols. Now, well, let's just say the suit doesn't fit anymore and the shine's long gone off. The world they sent me to investigate, a cluster of disappearances on the outskirts of Phoenix, Arizona. Hikers, campers, even a few homeless folks drawn to the desert edge vanished without a trace. Locals muttered about cartel violence, but there was a wrongness to the whole pattern. Too clean, too thorough. I figured it was something more organized. A cult, maybe? The Bureau has a file on every flavor of lunatic, after all. My partner was Agent Garcia. Seasoned, cynical, the kind of guy who'd seen too much darkness to be rattled anymore. We went undercover, jeans and hiking boots instead of crisp suits. Spent our days poking around the desert fringes, interviewing jittery witnesses, trying to piece together some thread of logic. A local ranger tipped us off about a system of caves out east of the city, rumored to be used for drug smuggling. Figured it was worth a look. A cult or cartel might hole up in a place like that. We went out under cover of darkness. The desert air was crisp, filled with a strange hum that set my teeth on edge. Cicadas, maybe, but too rhythmic. Flashlights cut through the gloom as we approached the cave mouth. The smell hit us first, metallic and sweet, like overripe fruit and old blood mixed together. Garcia swore under his breath, hand drifting to his sidearm. We edged cautiously into the darkness. The interior was surprisingly smooth, like the walls had been melted or carved, not formed naturally. Our flashlights picked up glistening trails on the ground, viscous, iridescent slime. Then we found the source. Bones, half dissolved, stripped of flesh, littering the cavern floor. They were segmented, insectile, like nothing I'd ever seen, and the size of them implied a creature straight out of a nightmare. "Let's get the hell out of here," I hissed. There was too much bad history in those bones, too clear a sign that whatever lurked here wasn't human. We were halfway to the cave mouth when Garcia tripped. His flashlight went skittering, tumbling end over end into the blackness. Before we could react, the hum changed pitch, rising to a whine that drilled into my skull. The creature erupted from the darkness, a blur of chitinous plates and writhing limbs. It was far bigger than the bones suggested, the size of a small car. The head, well, it was a writhing mass of segmented eyes and dripping mandibles. It let loose a shriek somewhere between a buzzsaw and a howl that set off every alarm bell in my body. Garcia, bless him, didn't freeze. He opened fire, the gunshots deafening in the enclosed space. The rounds pinged off the thing's armor, barely slowing it down. It lunged for him, one segmented leg slicing through the air. Garcia leapt aside, rolled with the impact, but not fast enough. The claw sliced his leg open, a spray of crimson across the rock. He screamed, more in rage than pain. "Run!" he roared at me. "Don't look back, just run." I didn't need telling twice. I scrambled for the cave mouth, the creature's roar echoing behind me. Halfway out, I risked a glance back. Garcia had his back to a wall, emptying his pistol into the oncoming monstrous form. But the creature was too fast, too strong. I saw the claw sweep down, saw Garcia's body lifted, then the wet crunch as he was. I turned away, bile rising in my throat, and bolted out into the desert night. I ran until my lungs burned, until I collapsed, gasping on the sandy ground. The creature didn't follow. Maybe the gunshot spooked it, maybe it preferred dark spaces. It didn't matter. I was alive. Garcia was dead. Fulfilling that most dreaded of agent duties, sacrificial pawn to buy time. I got up shakily, stumbled my way back to civilization. The aftermath is the usual bureaucratic mess. The Bureau sanitized the incident, covering up Garcia's death as a freak hiking accident. I know better. They offered me a desk job, compensation for my ordeal. I took it, though a part of me rebelled against the safety. My apartment has the blinds drawn 24/7, and I jump at every creak in the floorboards. That hum, the insectile whine, lingers in my dreams, and with it the image of Garcia's shattered body. People tell me I'm lucky to be alive. I guess, but some days out here in the gray anonymity of my new life, I feel more trapped than ever, just waiting for the darkness to seep up through the cracks. Because that creature is still out there, somewhere in the depths of those desert caves. It lives, it grows. Breeding, maybe. Creating more of its monstrous kind. And the next time someone ventures too close, the next time some curious hiker or hapless soul stumbles on its lair, there won't be anyone like Garcia to save them. I should have known better than to trust an unmarked road. After years of travel writing, you'd think I'd have a sharper instinct for bad decisions. But there I was, driving deeper into DeFord Pinchot National Forest, chasing a forgotten trail that was supposed to lead me to a ghost town no one could find anymore, vanished off the map. The ranger at the visitor center had said with a grin, "People go looking for it and never see it again. It's like the road just swallows you up." He laughed, but I could see the glint in his eye. He loved spinning those kinds of tales for tourists. But I wasn't a tourist. I was a writer, damn it. I had an assignment to finish, and there was no room for ghost stories. I followed the narrow, crumbling logging road as it wound deeper into the trees. My RV rattled along, tires crunching over fallen branches and loose gravel. The road narrowed, barely wide enough for my rig, but I kept going. I'd done my research, and this was the right way, even if the forest seemed determined to reclaim the path. It had been a long day, and I was eager to set up camp and relax before exploring the area the next morning. The further I went, the thicker the trees grew, their branches knitting together overhead, blotting out the late afternoon sun. My GPS had long since lost signal, but I didn't need it. I was prepared. I had maps. I was confident I didn't get lost easily. But as I rounded the last bend in the road, something changed. The sky had been clear earlier, but a dense fog was rolling in now, thick and fast. I could barely see 10 feet in front of me. The road, which had been clear just moments ago, seemed to dissolve into a gray blur. I slowed to a crawl, squinting through the windshield. Just up ahead, a small clearing appeared through the mist. It wasn't much, but it was enough room for me to park the RV. I didn't have many other options. I pulled in, killed the engine, and stepped outside. The fog clung to everything, making the air feel damp and cold. It shouldn't have been this cold, not in early fall. The chill crept into my bones, but I pushed it aside and started setting up camp. Something about the silence gnawed at me, though. No wind, no birds, no rustling leaves, just stillness in that damned fog. I finished my setup quickly, then retreated to the warmth of the RV. I wasn't nervous, but the quiet was getting under my skin. I grabbed a beer from the fridge, settled into the driver's seat, and pulled out my maps. I spread them across the dash, looking for my next move. The ghost town was supposed to be less than a mile away, hidden deep in the woods, down a trail that was barely marked. Tomorrow I'd hike to it, get my pictures, take some notes, and be done with it. Easy. But something was off. The road I'd driven on wasn't showing up on the map anymore. I traced the route with my finger, confused. The road was here. I'd just come down it, but now on the map, it wasn't anywhere to be found. I leaned back in my seat, staring out the windshield at the fog-shrouded forest. The ranger's words echoed in my mind, vanished off the map. I laughed softly to myself. It was a joke, a tall tale to scare off amateur hikers. Nothing more. Still, when I stepped outside to stretch my legs, I felt it again, that unsettling stillness. The fog was thicker now, curling around the RV like tendrils. I looked back toward the road I'd driven in on, but it wasn't there. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, and stepped forward, peering into the mist. No road. No road, just an unbroken line of trees. My stomach tightened. I walked a few more steps, hoping the road would reappear, but it didn't. The forest was dense, the trees close together. There was no sign of the path I had taken just hours earlier. It was as if it had been swallowed whole. I jogged back to the RV, heart racing now. I grabbed my flashlight and marched back to where the road should have been, sweeping the beam through the fog, but all I could see were trees, tall, dark, and oppressive. My breath fogged the air in front of me as I stood there, trying to make sense of it. The road couldn't just vanish. I hadn't gotten lost, I couldn't have. But when I turned back toward the RV, I felt it, that creeping sensation that I wasn't alone. I swung the flashlight around, heart pounding, and for a split second I thought I saw movement in the fog. A figure, tall and thin, slipping between the trees. "Hello?" My voice cracked. I regretted speaking as soon as the word left my mouth. The fog swallowed my voice, leaving nothing but silence in its wake. I scanned the tree line again. Nothing. I backed toward the RV, my nerves on edge, and hurried inside, locking the door behind me. I wasn't about to let a little fog and a missing road freak me out, but something felt wrong. The rational part of my brain was trying to make sense of it. Fog could play tricks on your eyes, and maybe I'd missed a turn somewhere. That was all. But deep down, I wasn't convinced. I spent the next hour pacing the length of the RV, checking and rechecking my maps, trying to retrace my route in my head. Nothing made sense. The road had been there. I hadn't imagined it. By nightfall, the fog had thickened to the point where I couldn't see more than a few feet outside. The temperature had dropped even more, and I cranked up the RV's heater, wrapping myself in blankets. Sleep didn't come easily. I kept hearing things, soft thuds like footsteps outside, and whispers that seemed to drift through the walls. It had to be the fog, I told myself. It was distorting sound, making me paranoid. But when I woke in the middle of the night, there were voices. I sat up in bed, my breath catching in my throat. I could hear them, faint, murmuring voices coming from outside. I crawled to the front of the RV, heart hammering, and peered through the windshield. The figures were back. This time, there were more of them. Shadows in the fog, standing still, watching. They were too far away to make out any details, but I could feel their eyes on me, cold, hollow eyes. I blinked, and they were gone. I scrambled to turn on the engine, but it sputtered and died. No power. The RV was silent, cold, and dark. I grabbed my flashlight and flicked it on, but the beam barely cut through the fog. I tried to stay calm, tried to think logically, but my heart was racing, my mind spiraling into panic. The road was gone, the figures were back, and now I was trapped here. I had to get out. I grabbed my jacket and burst out of the RV. The cold hit me like a slab. I marched toward where the road had been, determined to find it, but the forest had shifted. The trees were closer now, the fog denser. I walked for what felt like hours, but the landscape stayed the same. It was as if I was walking in circles. No matter which way I turned, I kept ending up back at the RV. I could hear the voices again, closer now. They echoed through the fog, indistinct and ghostly. My flashlight flickered, and the shadows appeared again, closer this time, standing just beyond the beam of light. I ran back to the RV, slamming the door behind me, my chest heaving. The figures were out there, circling me, waiting. I don't know how long I sat there, clutching the flashlight, waiting for something to happen. The fog pressed against the windows, and the shadows loomed outside, never coming closer but never leaving. Morning came, though I could barely tell. The fog hadn't lifted, and the road was still gone. I tried the engine again, and this time it roared to life. Relief washed over me, but it was fleeting. I turned the RV around, driving slowly back the way I had come. If the road was there, I couldn't see it. All I could do was follow the same path I'd taken before, hoping it would lead me out. But it didn't. The road stretched out endlessly in front of me, a straight line through the fog, leading nowhere. And as I drove, I realized with sinking dread that I was still trapped. The road hadn't taken me anywhere. I was driving in circles and the figures were still there, watching, waiting. They had me now. The vanishing road wasn't just a story. It was real, and I wasn't getting out. This happened to me a few years back. Back then, solo road trips were my escape. Folks think that sounds lonely, but for this city planner with too much traffic and not enough quiet, the open road felt like freedom. My name is Frank Evans, by the way. My folks always insisted on unique monikers for their brood. My chosen destination this time was Utah's Red Canyons, a real contrast to the gray urban sprawl I endured back home. I'd stocked up my RV with all the usual gear: sleeping bag, hiking boots, maps, plenty of granola bars. What I hadn't prepared for was what stumbled onto my path deep in Zion National Park. Don't get me wrong, I'd done the popular trails, the type filled with selfie-taking crowds and kids in matching shirts. Thing is, the more remote stretches held more lure. There was a marked path called Kolob Narrows I'd read about on some outdoor adventure blog. They boasted about stunning slot canyons, towering rock formations, the works. And according to reviews, it was guaranteed to be less crowded due to the challenge factor. That sounded more my speed, so bright and early one morning, I packed a lightweight day pack and got myself to the trailhead. Now, nature isn't my whole identity like those survivalist types, but I have common sense. A compass was on me, plenty of water, all packed with my usual attention to detail. There weren't too many folks starting out at my hour. A bonus indeed. The first couple of miles were gorgeous, sandstone formations that felt otherworldly, streams with water so clear you could see fish darting about. The trail followed the river at times, making for a bit of rock hopping, but nothing overly intense. However, as the day wore on, I noticed a shift. The crowds had vanished, the path narrowed, and I'd swear the rock faces enclosed with every step. No cell signal, of course, something I should have anticipated. Yet there was this pull forward, the thought of whatever waited out there. Maybe some jaw-dropping rock formation, something most tourists never witnessed. Stupid in hindsight, maybe, but it didn't feel that way in the moment. It must have been mid-afternoon when I reached a part of the trail that bordered a particularly treacherous stretch of river. This wasn't kiddie pool level. We're talking rapids, maybe 10 yards across, between canyon walls that stretched so high they blocked out the sky itself. It felt like some ancient gate barring progress, and at that very moment it dawned on me. I hadn't spotted another human the entire afternoon. I wasn't about to take some ridiculous risk, and for that water alone it would mean turning back, admitting a bit of defeat maybe, but that's the sensible course of action, right? Still, it rankled. Something in me stubbornly yearned to continue. But even as I contemplated my choices, an eerie silence descended. No bird calls, not even a cricket's chirp. It sent shivers down my spine. Then as I pivoted back, I froze. Maybe 20 feet away, obscured in the shadow of a massive boulder, stood a figure. A man-shaped figure, at least. All I could register was an impression of size, larger than anyone I'd ever met, and his form seemed distorted by the rock's jagged outline. My instincts screamed for a clear look to assess my situation, yet as my eyes refocused, I stumbled back with a shocked shout. This person held something slick and crimson in his hand, something not animal. In my gut, I knew that was blood. My shout didn't startle him. There was this casual turn of the head, like a hawk regarding some tiny critter scuttling past. Our eyes met, or did they? I couldn't quite tell from behind his ragged hair and tangled beard. There was just emptiness in that look. Then, as easily as he appeared, he slipped back behind his shadowed perch, vanishing from sight. Logic, rationality, all that disappeared. Suddenly, that treacherous river seemed far less terrifying than the shadowy form who stalked it. Fear turned my muscles to ice, then pushed me into motion. Every rock scramble back through the narrowing canyon felt like an escape out of the clutches of death itself. There was no sense of distance or time, just blind need to flee. I reached the RV near exhaustion, stumbling over my own words at the park ranger station as I gasped out something garbled about an attack, some madman in the woods. Later, there was the search party. There were cops asking endless questions, and that gnawing uncertainty about whether they believed me. Maybe they thought I'd hallucinated from heat exhaustion, which wouldn't be an unreasonable conclusion based on how I appeared. Of course, they found nothing. No tracks, no sign of that shadowy predator. The cops seemed resigned. The rangers offered those patronizing reassurances about getting lost in the park's size. And the worst part, the suspicion I started to have about, well, whatever those crimson sticky pieces had been, I saw clutched in the hand of that haunting figure. There went my hiking. It wasn't some dramatic conversion to city life. It was more like a gradual shift. You get out on some trail, now see people start vanishing around a bend, and that deep, primal fear takes root. Then I imagine those eyes, vacant and predatory, peeking out from behind some overgrown scrub. And even if common sense says, hey, that's improbable, fear doesn't work with logic. So now, my open roads lead towards more populated destinations, and my maps stay close to the interstates, where signs of civilization abound. Less adventurous than what I craved before, maybe. But I swear, sometimes you hear stories on the news about disappearances in isolated regions, missing hikers whose cases just sort of trail off without answers, and all I can see when I hear them is that figure lurking in the shadows. Maybe my brush with darkness in that Utah canyon is the closest I'll ever come to knowing what true evil looks like. Frankly, it's an experience I could have lived a full, happy life without. My name's Aaron Gomez, and this took place back in 1985 in Great Basin National Park, Nevada. I'm from the Shoshone Nation and spent most of my life bouncing between desert valleys and sagebrush flats. You get a feeling for open land like that, with a little too much sky pressing down on you and winds that whip grit into your teeth. Not many folks stay out here long enough to grow fond of the place, but it felt right to me, like I was just another part of the rocks and cactus, the rattlesnakes, the dust. That's why I took up guiding. Figured I'd help city folks get some sense knocked into them about nature. The kind that only spending a few rough nights outdoors could do. These clients would come all loaded down with unnecessary gear. 3 layers of jackets, portable espresso makers, the works. I'd show them the truth. Walk them through the piñons and up the mountain trails where you start seeing the world how it is. Raw, sharp, and endless. That September, I was taking out a group of 5 hikers who all looked like they jumped straight out of a Land's End catalog. Middle-aged guys with weekend warrior ambitions and all the sense of a tumbleweed rolling down a highway. One of them, a big guy named Lloyd with a scruffy beard he was probably growing for effect, kept lagging behind. Said he pulled something in his knee on the first mile. I should have turned the group around right there, but they'd paid up front, and I was a few too many bills short of my truck payments to turn them back. So I let Lloyd hobble along, cracking the occasional joke about how maybe he'd meet his maker on the mountain. I threw him a dark look, half hoping he'd quit the banter, but he didn't catch on. The others, buzzing with their camera gear, forged ahead like the steady line of ants they were, oblivious to the nervous edge I felt creep up my spine. By noon, we'd reached a high meadow blanketed in low grasses and shaded by rugged pines, the kind of place that feels like it hasn't seen a human footstep in decades. I started setting up a small fire pit when Lloyd called out from behind me, his voice strained with some mix of pain and fear. I glanced up to see him frozen, pointing toward the tree line. There, just on the edge of the clearing, I spotted it. A shape too large to be any mountain cat, too low and broad to be a bear. This was different. Its body was covered in coarse, matted fur, gray and greasy, with tufts missing here and there like it had clawed itself in frustration. Its limbs were strangely jointed like a dog's, but with an awkward crawling stance that reminded me of a sick coyote. But that head, that was all wrong. The creature's head hung low, almost grazing the ground as it moved, a snarl twisting its lip back. A jaw too long and jagged teeth poked out at angles reminiscent of a boar's, but sharper, crueler somehow. Its mouth stretched wide as if split to the ears, and even from a distance I could tell this thing wasn't right. Its stench wafted over on the wind, thick and cloying, a mix of decay and wet fur. I motioned for the guys to be quiet, but Lloyd had already panicked, taking an unsteady step backward and snapping a branch underfoot. The thing's head jerked up. For a breath, everything went still. Then it sprang forward, a flash of muscle and limbs charging straight at us. I shouted for everyone to run, but most of them stood frozen, eyes wide, rooted in place. I grabbed Lloyd, pulling him along, but he stumbled, falling flat on his back. The others scattered, diving behind trees or dropping their packs in blind terror. I whipped around to face it, heart pounding, hands instinctively reaching for the knife on my belt. It was charging at Lloyd, who lay there, eyes wide in shock, mumbling something about not being part of the plan. Before I knew it, the thing was on him. There wasn't any cinematic struggle or heroic last stand, just a horrible sound as it sank its teeth into his shoulder, shaking him like he weighed nothing. I ran, herding the other three in the direction of a rocky outcropping I'd seen earlier. The whole time I could hear Lloyd's shouts turning wet and choked, then silence. My gut twisted, but I didn't have time to process it. Survival took over, and I moved, one foot in front of the other, the instinct to keep going, stay low, and disappear into the landscape. We crouched behind the rocks, panting, ears straining for any sound over the wind. One of the guys, Roger or Roy, I could hardly tell who was who at that point, was pale, muttering something about calling for help. But no one had a radio or cell service out here. The park rangers barely patrolled these parts. We'd be lucky if someone came through here once a month. That's when we heard it, the crunch of footsteps in the brush. I held up a hand to silence them, hoping it was some deer passing through. But as the sound grew closer, I saw a flash of movement, and there it was again, dragging Lloyd's body, limp and lifeless, in its jaws. A trail of dark, wet streaks marked its path. It looked right at us. I'll admit I lost it. I grabbed a handful of rocks, pelting them in its direction as I shouted for the others to run. It dropped Lloyd, snarling, or something close to it, and started toward us, slow and purposeful now, like it knew we had nowhere to go. I didn't wait to see if the rocks did any damage. I turned, leading the charge up a steep incline, nearly slipping on loose gravel. Behind me, one of the guys slipped, tumbling back with a yelp, but I couldn't risk looking back. It was as if this thing had a vendetta against us, a grudge that went beyond simple hunger. There was something in its eyes, fear, intelligence, or instinct, I couldn't tell, that seemed fixed on not just killing, but inflicting suffering. I could feel its hot breath on the back of my neck, and every step felt like it would be my last. We finally reached a narrow crevice between two boulders, barely wide enough for us to squeeze through. We wedged ourselves inside, pressing back against the rock as the creature stalked around the entrance, snuffling and pawing at the ground. I tried to control my breathing, to stop from letting out a gasp every time it clawed closer. Minutes stretched into eternity as it circled back and forth, occasionally letting out these horrible, almost animalistic grunts. I wondered if it would try to dig us out, or just wait us out. But then, after what felt like hours, the sounds faded, and I allowed myself to breathe again, just a little. One by one, we crawled out, keeping low, our eyes darting around for any sign of the thing. We had no weapons, no real plan, except to keep moving. The park wasn't huge, but getting out on foot without supplies wasn't going to be easy. And now we had a predator with a taste for us. We moved like ghosts through the underbrush, barely daring to speak above a whisper. By the time night began to fall, we'd covered maybe half the distance back to the nearest ranger station. One of the guys, Travis, had managed to cobble together a makeshift spear from a fallen branch and his pocket knife. Not much, but it made him feel better at least. Just as we reached a small clearing, we heard a scream, short and high-pitched, cutting through the trees like a warning. We froze, eyes scanning the darkness, and then we saw her. A woman, or what had once been a woman, was hanging from the branches of a nearby pine, her body shredded and mangled, her head twisted at an unnatural angle. I felt my stomach churn as I recognized the same marks on her flesh, the same brutal tearing. This thing, whatever it was, had been here before, long enough to leave its handiwork scattered in its wake. Roger, who hadn't said a word since we'd started running, finally broke, vomiting behind a tree. I wanted to comfort him, say something to ease the tension, but words felt pointless. Survival was all we had, a grim march through shadows and silence. The forest closed in tighter as we pressed on. I could feel it out there, watching, waiting for one of us to make a wrong move. I didn't let my gaze linger too long on the shapes flitting through the shadows, the brief glimpses of movement. If I did, I'd lose myself to the fear. So I kept moving, breathing, praying in my own way to the old spirits of the land that maybe, just maybe, they'd keep me alive to see another sunrise. When we finally reached the edge of the park boundary, the ranger station lights were a distant glow against the pitch black of the forest. I looked back one last time, just in time to see it standing there, a shadow against the trees, watching us go. We stumbled into the station, gasping out half-formed words and desperate explanations to the rangers, who were more inclined to believe we'd been caught in a bear attack. But when I showed them the remains of Lloyd's torn jacket, the blood, the markings, they fell silent. The park would be closed for investigation, they said. As for that thing, they claimed they'd found nothing. I suppose they didn't need to find it. It would find them if it wanted. Some creatures are like that, a force that can't be reasoned with or outsmarted, just endured. My name is Justin Murphy, and this happened to me in the spring of 2013. I'm a covert ops specialist for the CIA. That's the cleaned up version. The truth is, I handle the dirty work. No official report will ever acknowledge it. I spent half my life overseas in the shadows, so when they tell me to pack my bags for a domestic assignment, I know something's gone seriously wrong. The briefing was short and unsettling. Outbreaks of extreme violence in a stretch of remote Appalachian forest land, multiple missing persons reports, mostly out-of-town hikers and campers, the kind easily dismissed as accidents if not for the sheer volume. My gut instinct said drug cartel gone feral, off-grid. I'd seen things like that in South America. But this was America, and my superiors were jumpy, whispering about bioterrorism and the like. I set up camp near the edge of the forest, an old fishing shack on a barely used road. Locals weren't much help, tight-lipped, looking at me like I was the threat, not whatever lurked in those woods. They called the disappearances the hush. Folks go in, nobody comes out, no bodies ever found. I spent my first few days doing recon. The forest was eerily silent, not the normal chirps and rustles of life, but a heavy, oppressive quiet that settled over you like a damp blanket. Even in the height of summer, there was a coldness in the air that made my skin crawl. A couple of times I heard noises, shuffling sounds, the crack of a branch, but too far away to pinpoint. It felt like being watched. A prickly sensation of unseen eyes tracking my every move. I started leaving trail markers, bits of colored fabric tied to trees, a broken twig propped against a rock. Just little things, but the kind a savvy tracker like myself could notice if they were disturbed. Then on my fifth night out, something changed. An animal, I told myself at first. Big one, maybe a bear. The low growls were guttural, laced with something I wouldn't label hunger. It circled my cabin, close enough that I could hear it breathing, feel the vibrations of its footsteps against the worn floorboards. I holed up inside, rifle trained on the door. Adrenaline thrummed through me, the taste of copper in my mouth. Part of me, the old operative part, was coldly assessing the perimeter, the weak points, how long I could hold out. And then it let loose a howl, a high-pitched screech that split the night and made my blood run cold. This wasn't a bear. It wasn't any damn thing I could name. The sun rose and the noises stopped. I ventured out cautiously, weapon at the ready. All was still, but the cabin had been marked. Shallow claw marks across the door and splatters of something dark and sticky that I didn't want to identify. I spent the day setting traps, the kind used on big game in Africa, and rigging the perimeter with motion sensor lights. My hands moved efficiently, but my mind raced. This assignment went way beyond my pay grade. I needed backup, experts, anyone who could explain what in the fresh hell I was up against. The radio signal was spotty out here. I finally managed to get a message out, garbled, full of static, but enough to get the point across that the situation was officially out of control. The reply was curt, promising a team en route. Estimated arrival 2 days. 2 days with my back against the wall, alone against whatever stalked these woods. Night fell, and it brought terror with it. My traps remained undisturbed, a testament to whatever creature was hunting me being too cunning or too unnatural to be caught like an animal. The noises were different this time, more purposeful. I picked up movement on 2 corners of the cabin simultaneously, then the roof. A low rasping sound like nails across slate. I fired at the ceiling, more out of panic than strategy. Wood splintered, revealing a glimpse of the night sky, and dear God, 2 eyes glowing crimson in the darkness. I scrambled back as something heavy landed on the floorboards above me, causing the whole cabin to groan in protest. Panic fueled me now. I threw a flare out the window, the burst of light momentarily cutting through the gloom. It was then that I truly saw it, a blur of bone-white flesh streaked with dried blood, a skeletal torso balanced on impossibly long limbs that ended in vicious claws. Its head, it had the shape of a human skull but stretched and twisted to something wrong, a gaping maw lined with rows of serrated teeth. I fired at it. Bullets ripped into its form, and it howled in rage but didn't go down. It tore through the roof, escaping with a final screech that echoed in my ears long after the maddening silence had returned. The aftermath of the attack was pure chaos. The flare had lit some of the undergrowth, sending flames racing through the dry brush. I had to move, get out ahead of the inferno. Grabbing whatever gear I could salvage, I bolted out the back door as the cabin started to collapse in on itself. The fire at my back offered some twisted protection. I doubted the creature would risk the flames in pursuit. But I couldn't linger. I sprinted through the trees, the smoke and darkness blinding me, forcing me to navigate by instinct and a fading familiarity with the layout of the land from my initial recon runs. My trail markers, they were gone, torn down, destroyed, or consumed by the blaze. I was well and truly lost, with whatever beast I'd enraged somewhere out there biding its time in the night. The firestorm raged for hours, turning a swath of the forest into a charred wasteland. Come dawn, I found myself on a barren, rocky outcrop and did a shaky head count. I'd lost the trail cams, my food rations, and was down to a few precious rounds of ammunition. On any other op, this would have sent me into crisis prep mode. But after the night I just endured, there was a grim acceptance. Standard survival protocols didn't matter when the enemy wasn't human. I spent a chilling day nestled in a crag, the distant smoke a constant reminder of the destruction I'd left behind. It gnawed at me, the thought of the locals caught in the crossfire. Were they all right? What if the creature, driven from its usual hunting grounds, turned its rage on them? I used what was left of the daylight to relocate. Found a cave in a nearby ridge, defensible, a good vantage point. It seemed untouched, no signs of blood or recent habitation. Yet I couldn't shake the sense of trespass, like I was barging into a predator's den. Night descended, bringing the noises back, not the brazen attack of before, but a more cautious circling. It knew where I was. I barricaded the cave entrance as best I could, a pathetic shield against the strength I'd witnessed firsthand. My only advantage, this place was tight, limiting its maneuverability. If it came for me here, maybe, just maybe, I wouldn't go down without a fight. The standoff lasted hours. I sat in the darkness, rifle trembling in my sweaty hands, eyes glued to the slivers of moonlight coming through the barricade. Every rustle of dry leaves, every snap of a distant twig sent my heart thudding. It came not through attack, but subterfuge. A sound directly above my cave, a scraping like claws against stone. It was on the roof, trying to get in from a different angle. I aimed, fired, and the noise ceased abruptly, followed by a heavy thump. Silence stretched on. Had I hit it? Killed it? I didn't dare hope. Something stank outside the cave, a rotting, fetid odor that turned my stomach. First light came, and cautiously I moved the barricade. The creature lay just outside, sprawled on the rocks. In death, it looked smaller, almost pathetic. Sunlight revealed the extent of the damage I'd inflicted. Several bullet holes peppered its torso. One had pierced an eye socket, but what made my breath hitch was the wound on the underside of its neck. Not a gunshot, but a long, ragged slash, like something else had clawed its way through its throat. I never got my backup team. By the time I made my way down to a ranger station, half-starved and babbling a lunatic's account, the only evidence I could offer was my mangled radio and the decaying corpse, rapidly being dismissed as a bare carcass mangled by coyotes. The official's eyes said it all. Wilderness shock, battle fatigue, maybe even a touch of pity. My return to civilization was a nightmare of its own. Classified debriefs, psyche evaluations, the cold analysis of men in suits who saw a traumatized agent, not the unnatural horror I'd faced. They offered me reassignment, a quiet desk job where no one would question my sanity. I turned it down. Told them if they saw monsters in that forest, they could damn well find someone else to fight them. I sold my old condo, bought a used truck, and headed north, far away from the oppressive hush of those Appalachians. Found a tiny cabin for sale in the Alaskan backcountry. It's a different kind of isolation out here, clean and harsh in its vastness. They have bears too, but the mundane kind. The kind you can track and anticipate. Most nights I sleep soundly, lulled by the wind and the creak of old wood. But some nights I wake up in a cold sweat, the smell of decay filling my nostrils. My rifle's propped beside the door, just in case. And when the wind whistles through the distant peaks, it sounds a hell of a lot like that same bone-chilling howl that haunts my nightmares. Because the men in suits, they never got the full truth. That thing out in the woods, it wasn't the first of its kind. It wasn't alone. This happened to me a few years back. Seems like forever ago. It was my usual fall camping trip, something I looked forward to all year long. Every autumn, I load up my RV and go deep into the forests to soak in the solitude. It's just me and nature, and I wouldn't trade it for anything. I'm no survivalist. Far from it, actually. I grew up a city kid with all the modern conveniences, but there's something about unplugging for a week that really resets me. That year, I took my trip to the heart of the Ozarks in Arkansas. This place just sings to me. You've got those rolling hills, crystal clear rivers, and enough dense trees to truly get lost in. It's the getting lost part that keeps me coming back. For me, it's an escape from the constant barrage of life. Work, social media, just that gnawing sense of always being connected. In the Ozarks, I become nobody. It's perfect. I parked my RV in a spot beside a winding gravel road. This secluded corner always seems to go untouched, which fits my style. On the first day after setting up camp, I hit the hiking trails. I found this lovely old path twisting alongside a river. So serene. Didn't see another soul out there the whole day. Got back to camp just before nightfall, cooked dinner over the fire, and crashed out early. Honestly, a pretty ordinary day, the type you crave when you've had too much of the real world. That first night, something just felt off. There were strange noises coming from deeper in the woods, mostly rustling, branches snapping, stuff you expect to hear out there. But my gut gave a twinge. It was persistent, this unease. But being overly cautious? I mean, come on. I wrote it off as the wind picking up and decided to turn in. Maybe tomorrow I'd explore and see if anything had been around my campsite. Next morning, I took that planned scouting mission. Nothing. No tracks or signs of any large animals. So what was my deal the night before? Paranoia? I shrugged it off and decided to enjoy my coffee by the campfire. I settled with a mug and listened to the morning songs of birds. I'd only have another few days of this serenity before facing the grind again. That's when I saw it. This thing. A flash of movement way off in the trees. First thought, a big old buck. We weren't in deer season, but in these woods there are all sorts of critters I rarely see back home. Curiosity piqued, I slowly stepped in that direction. It appeared again, then ducked deeper into the forest. At this point, I knew this wasn't normal behavior, definitely not deer-like. But again, Ozarks. Who knows what lurks here? This nagging feeling told me to walk away, back to camp, lock myself in that RV until it was time to leave. But you see, I'm a stubborn guy. My name's Ellen, by the way. Ellen Wilder. The sensible part of me screamed for retreat, but I'm always up for a challenge. What was the worst that could happen? That thought alone should have stopped me. Instead, I went deeper. I followed, trying to be stealthy. Branches whipped against my face, twigs cracked under my boots. Then it reappeared, but closer this time. It moved hunched over, almost ape-like, but also distinctly human. It vanished as quickly as it came, just a brief glimpse. Something wasn't right. Now there was fear. My breath quickened. Despite the warning bells, I followed. Dumb, right? It wasn't curiosity anymore, but this compulsive need to know, like I had to unravel this, whatever it was. This couldn't be natural. The Ozarks might be wild, but they weren't a zoo. And that shape, so strange, so out of place. This went on for a while, this game of cat and mouse. My heart pounded a frantic drumbeat, but the determination remained. Every glimpse showed, well, not much. I'd only get a hint of movement, like it was deliberately obscuring itself from full view. Now let me describe this thing the best I can. First off, it was big, tall and wide, way bigger than an average man. The way it moved, it had this unsettling fluidity, but rigid too, almost like it was constantly twitching, adjusting. That shape I first saw, low and crouched, seemed its default. Each time that feeling of wrongness would sink in even deeper. Not just fear, but an unease, like my primal instinct screamed for safety. I'd almost give up. Then there it'd be again, just beyond the trees, luring me in. I kept thinking I'd get an answer, find out what the hell was going on. I pushed further and further until that gravel road and my RV were only a distant memory. Then finally, something I hadn't prepared for. An old trapper's cabin, nestled within a clearing. Not that rundown cabin you see in movies. This one looked rough, but lived in. Something told me I wouldn't find friendly neighbors to ask for directions. But the movement, that thing had disappeared. My legs trembled, not sure if it was exhaustion or terror. This cabin, could there be a connection? Had that figure led me here? Was I losing my mind? That's when it hit me. The smell. God, it was foul. Rotting meat, but also something chemical underneath. My stomach lurched. There was that feeling again, an overwhelming sensation of wrong coming from inside that cabin. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end, yet despite it all, an almost perverse desire pulled me closer. I had to see, had to know. This compulsion battled with every screaming instinct to bolt the opposite way. Mistake. That was the turning point, because what started as just wrong turned into horrifying. I'm going to spare you the gory details, but what lurked in that cabin was beyond what most folks could even fathom. This ain't a ghost story. No, sir. This was raw, visceral evil. It was the figure, standing stock still just within the doorway, bathed in shadow. But something had changed. There were others. Twisted. Misshapen. I can't even call them human anymore. These things shifted and jerked, yet stayed strangely rigid, each one different. Twisted in a unique way, yet sharing this uncanny sameness that froze my blood, and all of them were staring right at me. Then it finally looked. The head of the first figure snapped toward me. There was nothing there, where a face should have been. Nothing I could even describe, no way to make sense of it. It let out this keening screech like rusty nails ripping apart metal. I lost it. Everything after that is a blur of scrambling feet and piercing screams, mine, I'm sure. Those figures were moving, scrambling not gracefully like before, but in a jarring, jerky way. I never knew how fast I could run. Branches slashed at my arms, mud swallowed my boots. It wasn't enough. That guttural moan grew louder, echoing against the trees. One thing burned through my panic. They were chasing me. The only goal was escape. No destination, just get away. Each ragged gasp burned my lungs. My legs threatened to give out. It wasn't that they were particularly fast, those figures. They staggered in this lurching gait. There was something wrong with the way they moved. Yet that didn't make them slow. I remember stumbling onto the gravel road, tears blinding me. My RV, if I could reach it just a few more yards, maybe I'd have a chance. But that damned keening wail filled my ears. They were closing in. I risked a glance back. They hadn't stopped, hadn't slowed. That same unnatural rigidity seemed to propel them forward. In that panicked split second, my foot caught a hidden root. I sprawled hard onto the rough gravel, hands scraping raw. Just before the darkness claimed me, I managed to snatch a final glance, and all those twisted figures were at the edge of the tree line, watching. That stillness again, their unnatural shapes stark against the foliage. It felt intentional, predatory. They didn't even attempt to attack as I lay there. Something held them back. I don't know how long I was out. Came to dazed, the sun starting its descent. Pain bloomed across my entire body. When I tried to stand, a wave of nausea swept over me. Broken ankle, probably. And there they were, back in the same position, unmoving. It was as if they never blinked. Those empty spaces where faces should be, fixated on my position. Night fell, an agonizing stretch of time where survival hinged on pure desperation. It didn't look like they could cross out from under the trees. I realized, if I crawled painfully on my belly toward my RV, the line of sight could break momentarily. It was a sliver of hope, insane as it sounded. And as the sliver remained stubbornly unbroken, I began to believe. Maybe they couldn't follow if they couldn't see me. Maybe in those shadows beneath the trees, something else held them back. With every agonizing twist of my body, that damned moaning chorus never changed in volume. Yet the camper drew closer, closer, until finally my outstretched fingers scraped the metal door handle. Somehow, in my fumbling, the door opened. I hauled myself inside, slamming and locking it behind me with barely a second to spare. Even within the safety of the camper, the moaning reverberated. That's when I heard it, clawing, scratching. It was all over the camper's thin sheet metal. Something pounded frantically against the windows. But with dawn, even the scratching finally ceased. Silence. I didn't move. Didn't check until long after the sun was back in the sky. Finally, my shaking hands grasped the steering wheel. My fractured ankle pulsed in protest, but gritting my teeth, I slammed the RV into gear. I barely dared look in the rearview mirror as I left that gravel road behind. Those woods might hold countless unseen horrors, but those figures never chased me again. Years have passed. Still, on particularly silent nights when the wind whispers through the trees just so, I swear I can hear that low, eerie moaning, that unnatural call. Every time it sends a prickle of ice down my spine. They never caught me. I got lucky. Maybe others haven't. All I know is, whatever dwells in those Ozark woods, it isn't what you'd expect. It's worse. They say ignorance is bliss. Sometimes curiosity bears a terrible price. I still try to forget the unnatural way they moved, the hollow spaces where their faces should be. It'll haunt me as long as I live. It was an odyssey into the depths of pure fright, an experience that redefined the very notion of terror. For within those shadowy woods, in that isolated realm, the human capacity for unimaginable evil took form. Some monsters lurk in the whispers of legends. Others exist in the harsh light of day. I faced the latter, and it forever changed me. My yearly camping trips never went beyond the local campgrounds after that. I have no explanation for those creatures, not one that makes any sort of rational sense. Were they failed experiments? Some dark cult's victims? Who knows? But in those moments I felt hunted, not just stalked, but watched meticulously. Like a specimen. It gnaws at me to this day. Did that thing, the first one, deliberately draw me deeper? Lead me to the cabin? I reported what I saw, of course. The police thought I was crazy. I spun some tale of a drug-fueled hallucination, but they didn't fully buy it. The look in their eyes said enough. Maybe a few searched out there, deep in the woods. Did they ever find that old cabin? If so, they kept it well hidden. There's no article, no missing person report, nothing that might explain it all. The official silence tells its own story. Either that or the figures dealt with anyone who got too close to the truth. This might be my last chance to share this story. They say I have cancer. It's spread pretty badly. Maybe this is a kind of confession before I go quietly. Or maybe someone with the means, the drive, will read this and decide for themselves. Just remember, sometimes it's better to leave certain mysteries untouched, to walk away while you still can. Have you ever had one of your favorite activities completely ruined for you, maybe forever, due to a negative memory associated with it? I have. I don't think I'll ever be able to sleep outside of anything that remotely resembles a house again after one night in late June of 2019. My boyfriend Tim and I had been together for about 2.5 years and actually met through some mutual friends who, like both of us, loved being outdoors, hiking, biking, kayaking, camping, you name it. We'd do it and probably had done it. Now, we're not really averse to getting dirty or smelling horrible after spending days in the wilderness, but I would say we tried to avoid it if at all possible. For that reason, we decided soon after moving in together to buy a decent-sized RV trailer. He already drove a truck, very useful for carrying outdoor gear or accessing remote-ish trails, so we invested a solid chunk of change in a 20-foot trailer. It was surprisingly pretty nice. I won't say it was the Ritz-Carlton of the camping trailer world, but it was better than sleeping on the ground with bugs and dirt and who knows what else. The back of it had a bathroom with a toilet, shower, and window. The middle had a kitchen and a couch that folded into a bed, and the front had another bed. No frills, but it got the job done. Because of the size of RV beds, we typically used both beds if it was just the two of us, but we could squeeze into the front bed together if necessary, or if we were in the mood. Starting in the spring of 2019, we took this thing all over the western half of the US. We both had jobs that allowed us to work remotely, doing this before it was cool, so we had some pretty epic road trips those first few months. Around Memorial Day, we wrapped up our trip and came home for a while, though we had plans to head to my parents' house for the 4th of July. We lived on the West Coast, they lived back in the Midwest, so it entailed a couple of days of driving. Rather than just driving as fast as we could, we decided to bring the trailer and make a week out of it, leaving near the end of June with plans to see the Grand Canyon, Painted Desert, Petrified Forest, and a whole slew of other stops along the way. On our 4th day of the trip, after we'd done most of our sightseeing, we pulled over at an RV park somewhere east of Albuquerque. Now, I would like to apologize to any New Mexico residents who may read this, but we weren't exactly getting the best vibes from the state thus far. Most of the people had been friendly, but there were like 100 too many stop driving drunk signs for our liking. So we weren't exactly eager to stay, if possible. Our accommodations for the night were on the outskirts of a small town, the kind where all the streets were numbered, and one main avenue through town had the gas station, general store, and church on it. If you've ever traveled the US, no matter what part of the country you're in, you've been through hundreds of these. We rolled in as the sun was beginning to waver and drop below the brown, dusty, mountainous peaks in the distance, creating a hazy light at dusk. We had established a good routine. I got the steps and awning on the trailer set up while Tim emptied the gray and black water tanks, for lack of a better term, our used shower water and poop, respectively, and replenished the clear water tanks. The campground was set up in a couple of large circles and was mostly empty. There were a couple of large 40-plus foot RVs set up on another side, and a few older couples at a fire pit in front of one of them, probably some people enjoying retirement, and a few other camping spots taken by vehicles or camps of varying sizes and elaborateness. The left side of our trailer was parallel to some thick brush and trees, so the right side, the one with the door, opened into the rest of the park. As I stood facing the RV, all 5'4" of me trying to reach and pull the awning down, I heard the hum of a motor approaching behind me. I turned to see a man on a quad bike approaching. Probably just some guy wheeling around because he's bored, I thought. I resumed working on the awning. I heard a shout behind me over the whine of the engine. "You need a hand?" I glanced over my shoulder and gave a half smile. "No thanks, I got it." The man got off the bike anyway. He stood on the opposite end of the awning from me, reached up and pulled, extending the cover over the porch of the trailer. "Oh, thanks," I said sheepishly. He nodded. I eyed his clothing. He had a blue polo shirt, khaki shorts, and a black baseball cap with some sort of logo on it. He also had a belt with what appeared to be a gun. His eyes were sort of small and beady and darted quickly around. There was a brief moment of silence as we gave each other a once-over. He squinted his eyes. "I'm Marco. I work security here," he said suddenly. "Oh, well, thanks," I replied awkwardly. This guy was definitely making my spidey senses tingle. Not in a good way, but I couldn't really figure out why. He just sort of walked away without saying anything else, hopped back on the bike, and left, looking back over his shoulder and locking eyes with me for a few seconds before he disappeared. I stood there for a minute, pondering. He's probably just kind of a socially awkward, weird dude, I reassured myself, going back to finishing up the task at hand. I felt an arm reach around my waist and grab. I jumped, letting out a sharp yelp. "Sorry," I heard Tim's voice behind me. I sighed, spun around and smiled, rolling my eyes at him. "A little jumpy tonight, aren't we?" He laughed, kissing me. I playfully slapped his shoulder. "Come on, let's get some dinner started," I said, opening the door to the trailer. As we ate a delicious, nutritious meal of hot dogs, Easy Mac, and pickles, I told him about my newfound friend Marco. "He doesn't sound weird to me," Tim said with a mouthful of hot dog. I raised my eyebrows and laughed. "Run that by me again?" I giggled. He swallowed, wiping his mouth. "I mean, what's so weird about him? He stared at you? I don't know. I just got the wrong vibe from him. And besides, how many RV parks have we ever stayed in that have security?" He laughed. "That would be none. But to be fair, we've been saying the whole time how weird of a state this is. Besides, I doubt the owners would let some creep run around pretending to be security." He had a point. We cleaned up from dinner, got ready for bed, and were soon out cold in our separate bunks, the only light coming from the moonlight outside that lit up the gravel parking lot. Tim took the front bunk. I took the rear bunk, which was right behind the door. I awoke to the sound of the engine, the same one I heard earlier when putting the awning up. I rolled over and looked at the display on the microwave clock. 1:48 a.m. I just wanted to sleep. And ATV Marco out there was on patrol. "I'm sure it's completely necessary for you to be doing that right now," I thought facetiously. I shut my eyes, but the engine persisted, coming closer and closer to our trailer. Then suddenly it shut off. Silence. Finally. I could get back to sleep. I froze. There was a tapping at the window, literally right next to my bed. If I rolled over, my face would be a few inches from the glass. I could hear a faint, low male voice from outside the window. "You need to come outside, right now." He kept repeating it. I rolled onto my back slowly and peeked out of the corner of the blinds. "You have to come outside." It was tough to see in the darkness, but the silhouette told me enough. It was definitely Marco, that weird security guard from before. My suspicions went from a slight weird vibe to "I'm about to call the cops on this guy in the span of 2 seconds. Bring your husband too. It's urgent." "What?" I got closer to the glass. He repeated it again. "You and your husband, come out, quietly. Now." Before, I was convinced this guy was some sort of rapist or something. Now, I wasn't sure. He either wanted to murder both of us or he legitimately needed us for some unfathomable reason. I still have no idea why. Maybe it was that aforementioned impeccable intuition, but I slowly stood up and crept toward the door. Glancing over at Tim, he was both fast asleep and probably naked. I decided that if Marco had truly evil intentions, I could scream loud enough to wake Tim and probably anyone in a half-mile radius. So I let him sleep peacefully. I silently opened the door and poked my head out. Marco stood crouched near my window and turned his head toward me. "There's someone in the trailer," Marco said bluntly in a quiet voice. "What?" I whispered. "Yeah. My boyfriend is asleep in there." I had no idea what this guy was talking about. "No, there's someone else in there," he hissed urgently. In my half-asleep stupor, I still had no idea what was going on. I stepped down out of the trailer, rubbing my eye, and let the door slam behind me, causing a loud bang. Marco winced and rushed over to the door. I heard a thudding in the back of the trailer, then a shout from within. Marco rushed in, pulling the gun from his hip. I was close behind. A man was standing on the bed I'd just been sleeping on. He was short with dark features, a torn pair of pants, and a plain black t-shirt. He had long, scraggly hair. His right arm was outstretched, holding a long knife, but he wasn't really pointing it. He just sort of held it. It was pointed sideways with the bottom of the blade facing the ceiling. That was creepy enough, but as we stepped into the trailer, he looked our way. He opened and closed his mouth a couple of times before letting out the most bizarre scream I've ever heard. It wasn't high-pitched. It was almost like if Kurt Bain's drawn-out screaming in aneurysm was done by a guy that might be a serial killer and was currently threatening my boyfriend. Oh, my boyfriend. I hadn't even looked at him. Though it had only been a couple of seconds, he had pulled the blanket up to cover most of himself and was holding a pan, which he must have grabbed off the shelf next to his bed. Marco held up his gun, and the man took off running to the back of the trailer, still screaming. The way he ran almost reminded me of an animal. He sort of trotted one leg at a time, leaning forward as he did, but with way more speed than you would expect. The door to the bathroom was open, which must have been where he had hidden. He proceeded through it and, in one fluid action, hopped from the seat of the toilet to the tank, then out the back window, landing somewhere in the bushes below. Marco ran out the door, chasing him into the woods behind the trailer. I stood in the trailer in a state of shock as Tim sat up in a similar, wide-eyed state. I sat on the bed slowly next to him. We were silent for what felt like forever. He exhaled loudly. "Yeah," I said, "I know what you mean." He smiled slowly. The rest of the night was a blur. The police came and took statements from most of the people staying at the park. The owner didn't sleep there at night. He arrived and apologized profusely, refunding our fee for the night. Marco had chased the guy for a few minutes on foot, but lost him somewhere in the thicket. As far as I know, they never caught the guy, and they'd never heard of any incident similar to ours to indicate where this guy might have been before. Before we left, I asked Marco how he knew the guy was in our trailer. He explained that he typically patrolled on foot and saw someone in the distance near the bushes, so he got onto his bike and made his way over to us. Around that time, he saw the guy climb into the bathroom window from the outside. That's when he woke me up at the window, trying to do so discreetly so as not to alert the creep. Both Tim and I thanked him repeatedly, but he insisted that it was just his job. The two of us were eager to get out of there. Even having only slept for a couple of hours, we drove straight through to my parents' house, taking turns sleeping in the back seat of the truck while the other drove. Our perfect road trip had lost its luster, and we were ready to rid ourselves of any trace of it. Once we arrived, before even going to my parents' house, the first thing we did was go to sell the trailer. Neither of us had any desire to keep the thing after what had happened, and frankly, I didn't think I would be camping again for a very, very long time. We pulled into the RV dealer and were able to quickly get a person to talk to. After making up some reasons for wanting to sell it, something about needing the money for an addition on our house, I think we were a few signatures away from the trailer and hopefully the associated experiences no longer being in our possession. "Now, if you can just get me the title for the trailer, that will be all we need," the salesman said. "I'll go get it while you sign these," I said to Tim. "In the glove box of the truck, right?" he affirmed. I left the office and opened the passenger door of the truck, leaning on the seat as I popped the glove box open. It was kind of a mess, which was odd because Tim usually kept it very organized. I rifled around and found the document I was looking for. As I pulled it out, a square of paper fell out and landed face down on the floor mat. I picked it up and turned it over. Then my jaw dropped. It was a Polaroid photo, dated the night it had happened, taken of me, asleep in bed. My name is Richard Jones, and this went down back in 2020, right out in the Blue Ridge Mountains in North Carolina. I thought I'd found the perfect campsite, middle of nowhere, just me and my RV with the fridge stocked with beer. I'm a simple guy, so this was paradise. No one bugging me, no deadlines, no cell service. Just the open forest and a sky full of stars. I parked near a patch of trees beside a thin creek, planning to spend the weekend doing absolutely nothing. Not that I was unfamiliar with camping. I'd been doing these solo trips for years, but never quite this deep in the woods, and definitely never with the kind of trouble that was about to hit me. Around dusk on the first night, I was roasting hot dogs over the campfire when I heard some rustling just beyond the trees. My immediate thought was bear, so I didn't move a muscle, figured if I sat tight it would lose interest. The rustling stopped, and I convinced myself it was a raccoon or something harmless. I went to bed in my RV, locked the doors, and that was that. The next morning, I stepped out to stretch, and there, about 30 feet from my RV, was this torn-up bag. Trash was scattered everywhere. It wasn't my trash. I always keep things tidy and secure. This was someone else's trash, and it looked old. Rusted cans, bits of stale food, even an old shirt ripped to shreds. But the weird part was, it didn't look like an animal had done it. I wasn't sure why, but it gave me that itch in the back of my mind, like something was off. Later that day, I decided to check out the creek. Figured a little walk by the water would clear my head. The path along the bank was overgrown, like no one had been there in ages. That was the appeal of it, honestly, the untouched wilderness. But about a quarter mile in, I came across something strange. There was a campsite, or what used to be one. An old tent, collapsed and torn, lay on the ground. Empty cans, a rusty cooking pot, all left to rot. It looked like someone had just walked away and left everything behind. As I got closer, I noticed a large dark stain on the tent fabric. At first I thought it was dirt, but as I leaned in, the smell hit me. A sharp, metallic stench. Blood. Old, dried blood soaked into the fabric. A normal person might have headed back to the RV, called it quits on the trip. But I was a little too curious for my own good, and I found myself poking around. That's when I saw something hanging from a tree branch a few feet off the ground. An old, tattered boot. Just one boot, swaying slightly. It felt staged, like someone had placed it there on purpose, and it unsettled me enough to finally call it a day and head back to my campsite. Back at my RV, I tried to shake it off, told myself it was just an abandoned site from some reckless campers who got in over their heads. Still, the weirdness gnawed at me. I cracked open a beer and sat by the fire, hoping a bit of booze would calm my nerves. That's when I caught a glimpse of movement in my peripheral vision. Just a flash, like someone darting between trees. "Hey!" I yelled, not really expecting an answer. Nothing. Silence. A chill crept down my spine. I grabbed a flashlight from my RV and shined it toward the trees. "All right, enough screwing around," I shouted. I half expected some dumb kid to jump out laughing, but there was only quiet. The forest just swallowed the light. Around midnight, I'd managed to drift off to sleep when I woke up to a sound I couldn't place, a sort of dragging noise, low and slow, like someone pulling a heavy sack across the dirt. I sat up, holding my breath, listening. The stopped, then started up again, closer this time. I was wide awake now, my heart pounding like a jackhammer. I scrambled for my flashlight, turned it on, and pointed it out the window. I saw him, a man, hunched and dragging something behind him. He was filthy, clothes tattered, hair wild, his face obscured by grime and shadows. He was dragging what looked like a bundle wrapped in an old blanket. He stopped, lifted his head toward my RV, and smiled. Not a friendly smile, but something cold, calculating. He raised a finger to his lips, signaling me to stay silent. Then he kept walking, dragging his bundle toward the creek. I wanted to scream, to yell, but fear clamped down on my throat. I just watched him disappear into the darkness. At sunrise, I was out of the RV, determined to pack up and get out of there. I threw my stuff together and was about to start the engine when I saw something propped up against the RV door. It was an old Polaroid photo, weathered and faded. In the photo was the man I'd seen last night, standing by a campfire with another person, a young woman. She looked terrified, eyes wide, her face half in shadow. My stomach twisted. Had he been watching me the whole time? Every instinct screamed at me to leave, but something made me get out of the RV. I scanned the area, half expecting him to be hiding behind a tree. I spotted the edge of the creek and decided to see if there was anything down there. Part of me hoped I'd find nothing, that I'd hallucinated the whole thing. Instead, I found the bundle he'd been dragging, partially buried under a pile of leaves and twigs. It was bigger than I'd thought. I knelt down and, with shaking hands, pulled back a corner of the blanket. Inside was what was left of a human body, decomposed beyond recognition. The stench hit me hard, and I staggered back, fighting the urge to vomit. I fumbled for my phone, realizing too late that there was no signal out here, no way to call for help. I stood there, heart pounding, when I heard footsteps behind me, slow, deliberate. I turned, and there he was, the man from the night before, standing just a few feet away, watching me with that same cold smile. "Find something interesting?" he asked, voice raspy, almost a whisper. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. My mind was racing. I had no weapon, no way to defend myself. I took a shaky step back, hoping I could make it to the RV, but he mirrored my step forward. "People come out here looking for peace and quiet," he said, almost conversationally. "Some never leave." He lunged at me then, a blur of motion. I dodged to the side, stumbling over the uneven ground. He swung something, a heavy stick, maybe a branch, and I felt it graze my shoulder. I scrambled to my feet and bolted toward the RV, adrenaline giving me a speed I didn't know I had. I reached the RV, yanked the door open, and dove inside, slamming it shut just as he reached me. He pounded on the door yelling, but I locked it and scrambled to start the engine. The RV roared to life, and I hit the gas, the wheels churning in the mud before finally gripping. I tore out of there, not looking back. I drove for miles, not caring where I was going, just wanting to put as much distance as possible between me and that man. Eventually, I found myself at a ranger station and I burst inside, babbling about what I'd seen. They took me seriously enough to call in a search, but when they went back to the site, they found nothing. No bundle, no blood, just an abandoned campsite. I was questioned, of course, and I told them everything I could remember. They seemed skeptical, but one of the rangers mentioned that they'd had reports over the years of people disappearing in the area. Most chalked it up to getting lost, but there was always a dark undercurrent to those cases, rumors of a drifter known to prey on campers. After that day, I never went camping alone again. I always thought the vastness of the desert would calm me. It was what I needed after everything that had happened at work. The constant pressure, the unrelenting deadlines, the suffocating feeling of being boxed into the same routine. I had planned the trip to Big Bend National Park months ago, thinking a week away from it all would clear my head. Solitude in the desert seemed like the perfect way to hit the reset button. I'd heard the stories, of course, rumors of spiritual significance, whispered legends passed down by native tribes, but I'd never put much stock in that kind of thing. They were just stories, right? I was wrong. Big Bend is a place where the land meets the sky in such a dramatic way that it's almost unnerving. The sun bakes the earth by day, and at night the stars stretch endlessly, a canopy of light over the barren landscape. The silence is deafening, and out here, far away from everything, it feels like the world is holding its breath. I arrived at the park late in the afternoon, the sun already beginning to dip behind the distant Chisos Mountains. My plan was simple: hike the trail to the window, a spot famous for its breathtaking sunset views. I'd set up camp, spend the night there, and continue deeper into the wilderness the next day. A week alone, away from the noise of civilization, I'd been craving this. Everything seemed perfect at first. The air was dry and warm, the trail rugged but manageable, and my gear was top-notch, a mix of high-end camping equipment and essentials I'd collected over the years. I felt prepared, confident, ready to let the desert cleanse my mind. But that feeling didn't last. By the time I reached my campsite, I noticed my GPS was flickering, the signal coming and going without explanation. I chalked it up to a glitch. Maybe the battery was low, though I had checked it before I left. Then my phone started to act strange. The battery, which had been at 80% when I arrived, drained rapidly, dropping to 20% in just a few minutes. No big deal, I thought. I wasn't here to use my phone. After all, this was supposed to be my escape from technology. As I set up my tent, the sun dipped below the horizon and a cold wind swept through the canyon. I hadn't expected the temperature to drop so quickly, and I fumbled through my pack for my jacket. My hands were shaking, and I wasn't sure if it was from the cold or something else. That's when I heard it. The first sign that something wasn't right. It was faint at first, just a whisper carried on the wind, so soft I thought I imagined it. But then it came again, rhythmic, almost like chanting, echoing through the canyon. I paused, holding my breath, straining to hear. There was nothing, just the sound of the wind. "Get it together, Tyler," I muttered to myself. I was overthinking things again. The wind through the rocks, that's all it was. My mind playing tricks on me, feeding into my anxieties like it always did. I finished setting up camp and tried to relax, but the uneasy feeling wouldn't leave me. The silence was oppressive, heavy, as if the desert itself was waiting for something. I tried to brush it off. I was just tired, exhausted, really. That night, as I lay in my tent, the whispers returned, louder this time, clearer. It wasn't the wind, it was something else, something real. The whispers grew, surrounding me, coming from every direction. They weren't in English, not even Spanish. It was an ancient language, guttural and rhythmic, like a chant I couldn't understand. I sat up in my sleeping bag, my heart racing. I reached for my flashlight, but when I clicked it on, the beam sputtered and died. My hands fumbled in the darkness, searching for my backup lantern. When I found it, I clicked it on. flooding the tent with light, but the whispers didn't stop. They only seemed to get closer. I tried to stay calm, telling myself it was just my imagination, but deep down I knew something was wrong. This wasn't just anxiety. Something was out there. I stepped outside. The cold air hit me like a slap to the face. The fire I'd built earlier had long since died down to embers. I looked around, scanning the landscape with my lantern. That's when I saw it. The small stone cairns, dozens of them, scattered around the edges of my campsite like tiny tombstones. They hadn't been there when I set up camp. I was sure of it. A chill ran down my spine. Someone had been here. Or something. My mind raced. Could it have been other hikers? A prank, maybe? But the trail had been empty when I arrived, and this was an isolated spot. No one would have come this far just to mess with me. The whispers grew louder, more insistent. My hands were shaking as I backed toward my tent, the beam of my lantern swinging wildly across the ground. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw a movement. A shadow just at the edge of the light, darting between the rocks. It was too fast to be human. My heart pounded in my chest as I swung the lantern around, trying to catch another glimpse, but there was nothing. Just the empty desert. I bolted back into my tent, zipping it shut behind me, as if that thin layer of nylon could protect me from whatever was out there. I sat there, gripping the lantern, listening to the whispers fade into the distance. I didn't sleep that night. Every noise made my heart jump. Every gust of wind felt like something moving just outside. By morning, the whispers were gone, but the unease lingered. I packed up camp, deciding to cut my trip short. I'd head back to the trailhead, call it a failure, and go home. There was no shame in that. But as I started hiking back, something was off. The trail didn't look right. The landmarks, the rock formations, they weren't where they should have been. I pulled out my map, trying to orient myself, but nothing matched. It was like the land itself had shifted overnight. I checked my GPS, but the screen was blank, dead. My phone, too, had lost all power. Panic set in. I was lost, completely, utterly lost, in the middle of the desert. I forced myself to stay calm, to breathe. I could find my way back. I just retraced my steps, but no matter how far I walked, the landscape seemed to warp around me, twisting into unfamiliar shapes. My footprints, which should have been visible in the sand, were gone, erased, as if I'd never walked that way at all. The sun climbed higher in the sky, beating down on me, but the cold from the night before hadn't left. It clung to me, seeping into my bones, and then I saw it again. The shadow. It was farther away this time, just a dark figure standing on the ridge, watching me. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. It was tall, impossibly tall and thin. I couldn't make out any features, just its silhouette against the sky. It didn't move. It didn't come closer. It just stood there, watching. I didn't know what it was, but I knew I had to get away from it. I turned and ran, my legs burning as I scrambled over the rocks, my pack bouncing against my back. But no matter how far I ran, the figure was always there, always just at the edge of my vision, standing still, waiting. My mind raced with the legends I'd read before the trip, stories of La Malahora, the evil hour, a spirit that lured travelers to their doom. It was said to appear just before tragedy struck, a warning of death. I hadn't believed in those stories, not really. But now, with the shadow stalking me, I wasn't so sure. The sun began to set, casting long shadows across the desert. I was exhausted, my body aching, my mind frayed. I couldn't keep running. I had to face it. I stopped, turning to look at the ridge behind me. The shadow was closer now, standing still, its dark form blending with the rocks. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves. "I'm not afraid," I said aloud, though my voice wavered. "I'm not afraid of you." The shadow didn't move, but I felt its presence, heavy and oppressive, weighing down on me. My heart raced, but I forced myself to stand my ground. Slowly, the figure began to fade, dissolving into the landscape like smoke. The whispers, too, faded into the wind, growing quieter until they were gone. I stood there for a long time, the desert silent once more. The sky darkened above me. I didn't know what had just happened, but I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't stay here any longer. The next morning, I found the trail. The landscape had returned to normal, the landmarks in the right places, as if nothing had changed. I made my way back to the trailhead, my legs weak, my mind still spinning from the encounter. I left Big Bend that day, never to return. Some people might say it was just my imagination, that the isolation and the anxiety had gotten to me. But I know what I saw, I know what I heard. The desert is a place of mystery, a place where the veil between worlds is thin and sometimes something crosses over. I wasn't sure why I'd come back. Maybe it was the need for closure, a way to put everything behind me. It had been over a year since my wife Sarah passed away, and ever since I'd been drifting through life, avoiding people and dodging their well-meaning questions. When I was a park ranger, the forest had always been my sanctuary, and I thought maybe, just maybe, a trip back to the Cherokee National Forest would help clear my head. But as I parked my RV in a secluded spot deep in the forest, far from the designated campsites, I couldn't shake the feeling that this trip was a mistake. The sun was setting, casting long shadows between the trees, and I watched the colors fade into darkness as I set up camp. The last time I'd been here was with Sarah, years ago, when life still made sense. Now, it was just me, alone with my thoughts. I wanted the isolation. I needed the silence, or at least that's what I told myself. I sat by the fire, the crackle of the flames, the only sound in the stillness of the forest. The night pressed in around me, thick and quiet, the kind of quiet that makes you feel like the world is holding its breath. I stared into the fire, my mind drifting back to Sarah. I could almost hear her laugh, see her smile through the flickering flames. That's why I was here, to say goodbye, to finally let her go. I thought this place, our place, would help me find some peace. I was wrong. It started with a phone call. I'd turned my phone off the moment I arrived, didn't want any distractions, didn't need anyone bothering me. But as I sat there, staring into the flames, I heard it. The familiar sound of my phone ringing. I frowned, confused. I hadn't turned it back on. Slowly, I stood up and walked over to where I'd left it on the small table inside the RV. The screen was glowing, showing an unknown number. How was that possible? I had no signal out here, not this far from the nearest cell tower. Curiosity got the better of me. I answered the call. Hello? My voice was rougher than I expected, a little shaky at first. There was nothing but static, a low hum that buzzed in my ear. I was about to hang up when I heard it. A voice, faint but unmistakable. Dan. I froze. My blood turned to ice. It was Sarah's voice. Dan, it's me. My heart pounded in my chest as I gripped the phone tighter, my mind racing to find some logical explanation. It had to be a prank, some sick joke. But the voice, it was hers. The way she said my name, that soft, familiar tone. Sarah, I whispered, barely able to get the word out. The static surged louder now, drowning out the voice. I called out again, but the line went dead. I stood there in the RV, staring at the phone in my hand, my breath coming in short, ragged gasps. What the hell just happened? I checked the call log. Nothing. No record of the call. It was like it had never happened. I shook my head, trying to convince myself it was just a trick of the mind. Grief does strange things to people. Maybe I was imagining it. Maybe I just wanted to hear her voice again so badly that my mind had created it. But as I sat back down by the fire, the unease gnawed at me. Something felt wrong. The night wore on and the fire died down to embers. I retreated into the RV, locking the door behind me. The quiet felt oppressive now. Too heavy. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to forget the sound of her voice. Then the phone rang again. I bolted upright, my heart pounding in my ears. The screen glowed in the dark, the same unknown number flashing across it. I hesitated this time, but eventually answered. Dan. The voice was clearer now, more distinct. It was Sarah, no doubt about it. Come to me. The line crackled, and for a moment I swore I heard something else, a faint knocking sound like someone tapping on the walls of the RV. I jumped out of bed and hurried to the window, peering out into the darkness. There was nothing, just the dense forest, silent and still. I ran a hand through my hair, trying to calm myself down. This wasn't happening. It couldn't be happening. I closed my eyes, forcing myself to think rationally. There was no way Sarah could be calling me. She was gone. I knew that. I'd buried her. But the voice, it was so real. I didn't sleep much that night. Every creak, every whisper of wind against the RV had me on edge. By morning, I was exhausted, my nerves frayed. The next day, I tried to distract myself. I hiked some familiar trails, took in the beauty of the forest, and reminded myself why I love this place. but the feeling of unease never left me. It lingered like a shadow, always just out of sight. That evening, as I sat by the fire again, my phone rang. I stared at it, dread pooling in my stomach. The same unknown number, the same impossible call. I let it ring, watching the screen until it finally stopped. I breathed a sigh of relief, thinking maybe it was over. But then the RV shook. It was subtle at first, just a faint tremor, like something had bumped into it. I stood up, glancing around the campsite. No wind, no animals. Nothing that could have caused it. Then I heard the knocking again. Soft, deliberate, like someone tapping on the side of the RV. I grabbed the flashlight and stepped outside, shining the beam into the trees. The light cut through the darkness, but there was no one there, just the empty forest, silent as ever. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm. It had to be an animal, a deer maybe. But as I turned back to the RV, I saw it, a figure just at the edge of the trees. It was too far to make out clearly, but it looked like a person. My heart skipped a beat. "Hello?" I called, my voice shaky. The figure didn't move. I took a step closer, squinting into the darkness. The figure stepped back, disappearing into the trees. I ran after it, the flashlight bouncing wildly in my hand. Wait! But when I reached the spot where the figure had been, there was nothing. No tracks. No signs that anyone had been there at all. Just me and the towering trees, their branches twisting overhead like skeletal hands. I turned back, my head spinning. This couldn't be real. It had to be the grief, the isolation messing with me. Maybe I'd finally lost it. As I walked back to the RV, my phone rang again. I didn't want to answer it, but I couldn't stop myself. I picked it up, my hand trembling. "Dan, I'm here. Come to me." The voice was so clear now, so real. It sounded like Sarah was right there with me, just out of reach. "I miss you," she whispered. "Come find me." My chest tightened. Tears stung my eyes. I wanted to believe it. I wanted to believe she was still out there waiting for me. But I knew it wasn't her. It couldn't be. I slammed the phone down and ran into the RV, locking the door behind me. The knocking started again, louder this time, more insistent. Something wanted me to open that door. Something wanted me to follow. I sat there in the darkness, listening to the knocks, the whispers, my heart racing. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. The following day, I packed up camp. Whatever was out there, I wasn't going to wait around to find out. I needed to leave, now. But the forest had other plans. As I drove through the winding forest roads, trying to make my way back to the main road, I realized something terrifying. I was lost. No matter which turn I took, I ended up back in the same place, the same trees, the same path. The forest was keeping me here. My phone rang again. I ignored it, but the knock came back, echoing through the RV, louder and louder, until I couldn't take it anymore. I slammed on the brakes, jumped out of the RV, and screamed into the trees. "Leave me alone." The forest answered with silence, and then the whispers returned. Sarah's voice rising on the wind, calling to me, luring me deeper into the trees. I didn't follow. I couldn't. Instead, I grabbed the only thing I had left, my lighter. I built a fire bigger than any I'd made before, the flames roaring into the sky. The knocks stopped, the whispers faded, the forest was quiet again. But I knew deep down, it wasn't over. I eventually found my way out, back to civilization, but I left the RV behind. I couldn't bring myself to take it with me. I knew what was waiting in those woods. I never went back to the Cherokee National Forest, and every night when the phone rings, I don't answer, because I know it's not her. It happened a few months ago when I was traveling in the countryside. I'd always been a bit of an urbanite and loved the comfort of busy cities, but a friend convinced me that I needed a change of pace to face the unexpected. "Rusty, you're too cramped up in those buildings. This trip will do you good." Little did I know how life-changing this decision would turn out to be. I reached the quaint town of Whitmore, Idaho, and checked into a small bed and breakfast run by an elderly couple named Bert and Mary Hawthorne. After they welcomed me with warm smiles and hot tea, they directed me to my room with assurances that their small establishment would serve all my needs. The first few days were as pleasant as expected. Lovely walks down country lanes under a cloudless sky, and life seemed to be on track. One breezy evening, as I made my way back from an unusually long stroll through the nearby woods, I stumbled upon a seemingly abandoned house, dilapidated and covered in ivy. Its windows were shattered, and the front door was creaking slightly in the wind. Curiosity piqued. I approached it cautiously, but hesitated to enter. Just then, a hushed yet frantic conversation between two children drew my attention. I cautiously peeked around the side of the house and found what appeared to be siblings engaged in a secretive conversation. They both had unusually black eyes that seemed almost unnatural. Convinced that they were probably lost or abandoned themselves, I made my presence known. "Hey there," I mustered up a friendly voice while trying hard not to show my concern for their eerie appearances. "Are you guys okay? You seem lost, or maybe scared about something." They turned toward me as one entity and stared directly into my eyes without uttering a word. At that very moment, an uneasy sensation crept through me, and I began to weigh the consequences of my decision to engage. As unnerving as it seemed, I couldn't walk away and leave these kids without help. With a faintly dry smile, I tried again. "You know, perhaps we all could go back into town and figure out a way to reconnect with your family, or just stay at the B&B where I'm staying until then." One of the children broke their silence surprisingly abruptly. "Oh, we're perfectly aware of that place," they uttered in unison, eliciting an involuntary shudder through me. Their calmly sinister tones seemed to bounce off my confusion. For a second there, I contemplated jogging away and pretending not to have seen them. But since the helpless get-out-of-jail tactic refused to surface, I stupidly asked anyway, "So, do you want to come with me? Or do you need anything? Maybe a bag of chips or any food?" Seeing no harm in such an offer, or maybe wrongly assuming it as a compromise, they immediately nodded in agreement. We headed toward the B&B together. They remained eerily silent, with the exception of some scarcely audible whispers between them. Upon arriving at the bed and breakfast, Bert noticed our peculiar company and apprehensively gestured me toward him. "Rusty," he said in an urgent undertone, "are you aware that those children are odd? They've been sighted lingering around on several occasions. Folks here believe they carry bad tidings." Before I could reply or attempt an explanation regarding my weird entourage for the night, they appeared behind us. Shadows cast across their unnaturally dark eyes created an indescribable aura that exuded heaviness and dread. "We negotiated a deal. Food for answers," I responded hesitantly, while assuring myself this wasn't any big deal. Bert reluctantly gave them some food, and we sat down by the fireplace to eat. An awkward silence filled the room, my mind racing in logic circles to untangle this bizarre encounter. As I opened my mouth to address them, suddenly a piercing scream resonated through the inn, setting our hairs on end. The children's eyes glinted with malice as they began laughing hysterically. Oily, black darkness seemed to pour out of them, and obsidian tendrils twisted and spread through the air. Every instinct screamed for me to run, but my body was paralyzed with fear. The darkness enveloped us as the menacing laughter echoed relentlessly, building in intensity. A cacophony of screams echoed throughout the inn. I desperately tried to call out for help, but my voice was drowned out by the sinister laughter. Bert, petrified by the horror unfolding before him, fumbled with his phone, attempting to dial for help. As the children menacingly approached us, the tendrils of darkness inched closer and assaulted every person in the room. People writhed and wailed as they struggled against the oppressive force that seemed intent on causing immeasurable suffering. The innkeeper's wife, Susan, rushed in from another room, only to be immediately seized by the tendrils. She screamed in agony as they wrapped around her body, constricting her like a vice. Everywhere, people were being hurt, tortured by an ungodly frenzy of malice. Suddenly, Bert pressed his phone against his ear, eyes wide with hope. "Please send help. We don't know what's happening here. Something terrible is happening." He gave their location to whoever he'd been able to reach on the other end of the line. The black-eyed children turned their focus toward Bert, their features distorted into a vicious snarl. In response to his attempt for help, they stormed toward him and tore the phone from his hand before crushing it underfoot. Susan's sobs were muffled as darkness enveloped her completely. We could no longer see her. The other guests suffered similar fates, each one consumed and silenced as this despicable scene unfolded relentlessly. I tried again to call out for help, but only managed a feeble choke. No one seemed able to resist or escape this living nightmare. The children showed no signs of stopping. Whatever twisted purpose they had, they were set upon us all. In a horrifying twist, the darkness receded slightly, revealing Susan's now lifeless body sprawled on the floor, her eyes wide with terror. Panic surged through those still alive as the reality of the children's power dawned on everyone. They were murdering us one by one. The air was soon filled with pleading and begging, desperate prayers from the victims to be spared this fate. But throughout the chaos, the children remained stoic and unrelenting. One after another, friends and strangers alike fell victim to the inky tendrils. I watched in abject horror as lives were snuffed out around me, unable to help or flee. Hours, or was it days, passed in this cyclic torment. The lucky ones passed quickly. Others were subjected to prolonged suffering before finally succumbing. A heavy hopelessness weighed me down as I awaited my turn with death. At last, surrounded by the dead and dying, I was alone with the black-eyed children. They stood before me, their eyes alight with malice. Suddenly, the room flooded with light as sirens echoed in the distance. The door burst open, just as an arm of darkness reached out for me. First responders spilled into the room, but stopped dead at the gruesome sight. The darkness and black-eyed children vanished without a trace, leaving only devastation in their wake. For weeks after that horrifying event, investigators combed through the remains of that night. They could neither explain nor rationalize what had occurred there. No answers were found for our suffering. I survived that hellish nightmare, but will bear these scars, physical and emotional, for eternity. Those lost in that twisted game haunt my memories every waking moment. The community was forever changed as families mourned and tried to pick up the pieces of shattered lives. I know one thing for certain. This world is not always what it seems. Somewhere in its depths lie evil forces that thirst for human agony and despair, and sometimes those forces take on a seemingly innocent form, like black-eyed children. People say the Appalachian forests are haunted. I'd heard the rumors, whispers of restless spirits and strange disappearances, but I'd never given them much thought. After years of debunking ghost stories as a journalist, I became the kind of person who trusted facts, not folklore. Still, I couldn't resist the pull of Pisgah National Forest. It was remote, beautiful, and full of forgotten places that no one cared to visit anymore. Perfect for the series I'd been working on for my blog, Ghost Towns of the Forgotten South. This was my passion now. Traveling, exploring the lost corners of America, and turning those empty spaces into stories. This time, I was after an old settlement deep in the forest, one that most people in town wouldn't even talk about. There were no records of why it had been abandoned, just strange rumors of sickness and disappearances. But those stories were always embellished over time. People loved their spooky tales, and it was my job to sift the truth from the legend. I parked my RV at a secluded spot near the trailhead, not far from the ghost town, or what remained of it. I planned to spend a couple of nights out here, explore, take some pictures, and maybe talk to a few locals who might know more about its history. The air was crisp and cool as I stepped outside. The towering trees cast long shadows, making it feel later than it was. As I set up camp, I noticed how unnaturally quiet the forest was. No birds, no rustling leaves, just silence. I brushed it off. Deep forests always had a strange stillness about them. I'd been in enough of them to know that the real danger was tripping over a root, not some ghostly figure hiding behind the trees. That first night, I woke to a distant sound, like laughter. It was faint, barely a whisper on the wind. I sat up in my sleeping bag, listening. Could there be other campers out here? I doubted it. This part of the forest wasn't exactly a tourist hotspot. My phone was dead, but I'd recorded some video earlier in the day. I grabbed my camera and replayed the footage. There it was, faint like a breeze blowing through, but unmistakable. Children's laughter. I pushed it out of my mind and went back to sleep. I had a lot of ground to cover tomorrow, and the last thing I needed was to let my imagination run wild. The next day, I set out to find the old settlement. It was slow going. Thick overgrowth and fading trails made navigation difficult. The map I had was basic. Nothing more than a dotted line leading me deeper into the woods. The farther I went, the heavier the air felt, like the forest was closing in around me. But I kept going, determined to find this place. After about an hour, I noticed carvings, Symbols, strange and jagged, etched into the bark of the trees. They weren't any kind of writing I recognized, but they gave me an uneasy feeling. Maybe it was some old superstition, a way to ward off bad spirits. I took a few photos and kept moving. It was another hour before I finally found it. The ghost town was just as eerie as I'd imagined. Small, dilapidated cabins stood in clusters, some half collapsed under the weight of time and nature. Weeds and vines crept over everything, reclaiming the land. I walked through the empty streets, my camera clicking as I captured the desolation, the eerie stillness. That's when I saw the cemetery, small, tucked away behind what must have been the church, though the building itself was nothing more than a few rotting beams. The graves were old, the names barely legible, but the dates caught my eye. Some of them were from decades ago, but others were from the future. My first instinct was that it had to be a mistake, some kind of misprint or vandalism, but the stones looked too old, too weathered to be recent. A chill ran down my spine as I stepped back from the graves. It didn't make sense, and I didn't like the feeling gnawing at the back of my mind. The forest was quiet again, too quiet. I realized then that I hadn't heard anything. Not birds, not insects, nothing since I'd arrived. I packed up my camera and headed back toward my RV. I'd gotten what I came for and figured I'd do some research on the strange gravestones when I got back to town. But something was wrong. The trail didn't look right. I was sure I'd come from this direction, but now the trees seemed different. The symbols I'd passed earlier weren't there anymore, and the forest seemed denser, more oppressive. My pulse quickened. I was lost. That was impossible. I never got lost, not with GPS and maps, not with all the preparation I'd done. I kept walking, trying to retrace my steps, but the more I walked, the more disoriented I became. Every turn led me to unfamiliar territory, and soon the forest looked completely foreign. My sense of time slipped away, and the sky started to darken, even though it felt like midday. Then I saw it, just ahead through the trees. A figure stood on the trail, tall and motionless, watching me. I stopped cold, my heart hammering in my chest. "Hello?" I called, my voice sounding smaller than I'd intended. No response. The figure didn't move. I took a step closer, squinting through the gloom, but as I did, it vanished, just gone. I spun around, scanning the trees, but there was no sign of anyone. My hands shook as I adjusted my pack. This was wrong. Everything was wrong. The sun had nearly set by the time I found my RV. It was parked where I left it, but somehow the journey back had taken hours longer than it should have. My legs were aching, my mind spinning with confusion. I climbed inside, locking the door behind me and collapsing onto the bed. That's when the laughter started again. Louder this time, right outside the RV. I shot up, my heart pounding. I could hear them, children laughing and running around, their voices bouncing off the trees. I grabbed the camera, pointing it toward the window. But the moment I did, the laughter stopped. The forest was silent again, suffocating in its stillness. I played back the footage on the camera, hoping to catch something, anything that would explain what was happening. But instead I heard something else, a voice, clear as day, whispering my name. "Alex." I froze. The camera dropped from my hands and hit the floor with a thud, the sound echoing in the empty RV. Something was out there, and it knew my name. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in the bed, every muscle tense, listening to the silence, waiting for something to happen. I thought about leaving, driving out of the forest and abandoning the project altogether, but the RV wouldn't start. I tried the engine a dozen times, but it was dead. Dead as if the battery had drained overnight. My phone was useless, still dead from the day before. I was completely cut off. The next morning, I decided I had to do something. I couldn't stay here, not with whatever was out there watching me. I remembered the symbols on the trees, the strange carvings I'd seen on my hike. They had to mean something. Maybe they were the key to getting out of here. I grabbed my camping knife and headed back into the woods. The air was heavy, thick with a sense of dread. My stomach churned, but I forced myself to keep walking. I found the first symbol carved into the bark of a tree just off the trail. With a deep breath, I drove the blade into the wood, carving through the lines. As soon as the symbol was broken, the air shifted. The forest seemed to shudder, and for a moment I thought I heard a scream, a distant echo and wail carried on the wind. I stumbled back, my heart racing, but I kept going. I found the next tree and did the same, cutting through the strange lines with my knife. The voices grew louder, the laughter, the whispers, all swirling around me like a storm. I could see the figures now, darting between the trees, shadowy, faceless figures watching, waiting. They wanted me to stop. They didn't want me to leave. But I wasn't going to be trapped here, not like them. I reached the final tree, my hands trembling as I raised the knife. The voices were deafening now, the figures closing in, but I didn't stop. With one last slash, I broke the symbol, and just like that, the voices stopped. The forest went still. The shadows vanished, and the oppressive weight that had hung over me lifted. I stumbled back toward my RV, half expecting the figures to reappear, but the woods were empty. When I got back, the engine started on the first try. I didn't look back as I drove out of the forest, my hands gripping the steering wheel tight enough to turn my knuckles white. I wasn't going to write about this place. I wasn't going to tell anyone what happened here. Some things are better left forgotten. I remember the day I decided to take the scenic route through the back roads of West Virginia. It was 2015, and I was driving my old pickup truck, a faithful companion on many such journeys. My name is Keith Carter, a freelance photographer with a penchant for capturing the unseen corners of America. I've always believed that the soul of a place is found off the beaten path. That morning, the sun was bright and the air carried the crispness of early autumn. I had just finished an assignment in Charleston and was heading toward a small town called Millfield, hoping to catch the fading colors of the season. The GPS signal was spotty at best, but I didn't mind. Getting lost was part of the adventure. After a couple of hours, I noticed the pavement giving way to gravel. The road narrowed, flanked by dense forests on either side. Towering oaks and maples formed a canopy overhead, casting dappled shadows on the ground. I glanced at the fuel gauge, half a tank left, plenty to get me through. As I rounded a bend, I saw a makeshift sign that read "Detour," pointing left. Trusting it, I turned and soon found myself on an even rougher path. The trees seemed to close in and the underbrush grew thicker. The sense of isolation was palpable, but I pushed on, eager to see where this hidden trail would lead. About 20 minutes later, the engine began to sputter. Confused, I pulled over and stepped out to check under the hood. I'm no mechanic, but everything seemed in order. That's when I heard it, a distant sound, like metal clanging against metal. It was faint but distinct, coming from deeper within the woods. Curiosity piqued, I grabbed my camera and decided to investigate. Locking the truck, I made my way toward the sound. The forest was silent except for the occasional rustling of leaves. After walking for what felt like half an hour, I stumbled upon a clearing. In the center stood an old farmhouse, weathered and worn. Its paint had long peeled away and the windows were boarded up. Behind it, I could make out the outlines of dilapidated structures, perhaps barns or sheds. The clanging noise was louder now, emanating from somewhere within the property. I approached cautiously, snapping photos as I went. The place had a haunting beauty, a relic of a bygone era. Near the farmhouse, I spotted a well with a rusty bucket hanging from a frayed rope. The air smelled of damp earth and decay. Suddenly, the clanging stopped. The abrupt silence sent a chill down my spine. I was about to turn back when a voice called out, "Who's there?" It was gruff, tinged with suspicion. Out of the shadows emerged a man, or at least someone resembling one. He was tall and gaunt, with unkempt hair and a beard that looked like it hadn't been trimmed in years. His clothes were tattered, and he held a hammer in one hand. "Sorry to intrude," I said, raising my hand slightly. "I'm just a photographer passing through. My truck broke down nearby." He stared at me for a moment before a crooked smile spread across his face. "Ain't many folks come around these parts," he said. "Name's Virgil." "Thaddeus," I replied. "You wouldn't happen to have a phone, would you? I think my engine's given up on me." He chuckled. "No phones here, but you're welcome to come inside, maybe have some food. Ma loves company." Something about his gaze unsettled me, but I didn't want to offend. "That's kind of you," I said. "Maybe just some water, and I'll be on my way." He gestured toward the house. "Suit yourself." Against my better judgment, I followed him. The interior was dimly lit, the air thick with the smell of mildew. The furniture was sparse and looked handmade. In the corner sat an elderly woman, rocking back and forth, humming a tuneless melody. "Ma, we got a visitor," Virgil announced. She looked up, her eyes cloudy but sharp. "Well, now isn't that nice?" she croaked. "Sit, sit." I took a seat on a rough wooden chair. "Thank you," I said. "I appreciate your hospitality." Virgil disappeared into another room, leaving me alone with his mother. She eyed me with a curious intensity. "You lost, son?" she asked. "Just a bit turned around," I admitted. "My truck broke down not far from here." Her lips curled into a thin smile. "These woods have a way of trapping folks." Before I could respond, two more figures entered the room, twins by the look of them, both with the same disheveled appearance as Virgil. They whispered to each other, casting sidelong glances in my direction. An uneasy feeling settled in my stomach. "Perhaps I should get back," I said, rising from the chair. "Leaving so soon?" Virgil reappeared, blocking the doorway. "At least stay for supper." "I'm afraid I must be going," I insisted, moving toward the exit. The twins stepped forward, flanking me on either side. "It's not safe out there," one of them said. I swallowed hard. "I'll take my chances." In a sudden movement, Virgil lunged at me, but I ducked and bolted toward the door. Bursting outside, I sprinted toward the trees. The sounds of footsteps and shouting erupted behind me. Heart pounding, I tore through the underbrush, branches scraping against my face and arms. I could hear them gaining on me, their heavy breaths and curses filling the air. Out of nowhere, a hand grabbed my shoulder, pulling me back. I spun around and struck out with my camera, the device smashing into one of the twins' faces. He screamed, clutching his eye. Using the distraction, I pushed onward. The forest seemed like an endless maze, but I focused on the fading light filtering through the canopy, hoping it would lead me out. A sharp pain shot through my leg as I stumbled into a concealed trap. A rusted bear trap clamped around my ankle. I cried out, collapsing to the ground. Blood seeped through my jeans, and the agony was blinding. Virgil and the other twin emerged from the shadows, grinning wickedly. "Told you it wasn't safe," Virgil sneered. Desperation fueled me. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small pocket knife. As they approached, I flicked it open and slashed wildly. The blade caught the twin's arm, causing him to recoil. Virgil was unfazed. He kicked the knife out of my hand and leaned in close. "We're going to have ourselves a real feast tonight." From behind, a loud crack echoed. A gunshot. Virgil's expression shifted from triumph to shock. He staggered back, a dark stain spreading across his shirt. Looking past him, I saw a man in a ranger uniform emerging from the trees, shotgun in hand. "Stay down," he shouted to me. The twin hesitated before fleeing into the forest. The ranger approached cautiously. "Let's get you out of that trap," he said. He pried the metal jaws open, freeing my mangled leg. "Can you walk?" he asked. "I'll manage," I grimaced. Together, we hobbled back toward a dirt path where his patrol vehicle was parked. "You're lucky I was nearby," he said. "We've had reports of missing hikers in this area." As we reached the vehicle, I glanced back. Virgil lay motionless on the ground. There was no sign of the others. The ranger drove me to the nearest hospital where I received treatment for my injuries. Authorities were notified and a search team was dispatched to the farmhouse. Over the next few days, the police uncovered a grisly scene behind the house. Shallow graves were discovered, containing the remains of several missing persons. The twins were apprehended not far from the property, attempting to flee deeper into the wilderness. The family's history unraveled, a lineage of recluses who had lived off the grid for generations, preying on unsuspecting travelers who ventured too close. Their names were entered into the records: Virgil, Amos, and Abel Crowley. In the aftermath, I provided my testimony and handed over the photographs I had taken. The evidence was more than sufficient to bring them to justice. With the case closed, I resumed my travels, perhaps a bit wiser about the roads less taken.